Hey guys, welcome to the Stripe Masterclass course. In this course, we'll take a deep dive into the amazing Stripe payments platform. This is a hands-on course where you'll build a fully functional e-commerce application using Stripe, React, Node, Express, and Firebase. The course is practical and very much hands-on, where you'll be shown step by step how to build an e-commerce platform from scratch. Now, the main focus of this course is how to integrate Stripe payments. To this end, we'll be looking at the different ways we can integrate Stripe, including using the Stripe hosted site to accept payments, creating a custom checkout experience, accepting credit card details right on our site, and also customer credit card management. Now, this is not a beginner's course in programming fundamentals, and you're expected to have at least a basic understanding of programming, control flow, and the JavaScript syntax. We're going to be building a full stack application, and for the front end, we'll be using the React library. Whilst we'll be building everything from scratch, you are expected to have a working knowledge of React and how components are created. You are also expected to have a basic understanding of CSS and Flexbox layouts. However, this will not be a focus, and I'll provide all of the CSS styles. For the CSS, we'll be using Sass to make writing CSS easier. So a basic understanding of Sass is also required. We're also going to be using modern JavaScript features. So we'll be making heavy use of ES6, especially on the front end, arrow functions, async await, variable destructuring, and much more. We're going to build a backend that we'll use to set up payments with Stripe, and this means that you need to have a basic understanding of APIs and the REST architecture, as we'll be creating our own API endpoints and also making requests to the Stripe API. We're going to take a quick tour of what we're going to be building throughout this Stripe Masterclass course. We're going to build this site from scratch, and it has a hero section and a featured collection section. Now, if you click through to the product, it will take you to the single product view, and you can add the item to the cart, and we can proceed to the checkout, and we can check out with Stripe. So I'm going to enter an email. And then we'll click on the checkout button. We'll be taken to the Stripe hosted page for checking out. So here we can enter a shipping address, and we can use the test credit card to check out. Once the pay button is clicked, we are then taken back to our site. So this is an example of the Stripe hosted checkout, which we'll be building from scratch. We're also going to be integrating the payment process right on our site. So if we go to this tab here, and then we go to the shop page, and we add a few items to the cart, and then we sign in. Now that we're signed in, if you go to the checkout page, we need to fill in a shipping address, and then we're going to click on the continue button here. Previously, we had this information hosted on the Stripe checkout page. Now this is hosted on our own site, and we can take the credit card number, the credit card expiry date, and the credit card CVC. So I'm going to use the test credit card. We also have the option to save the credit card with Stripe. So if I click on save card here, and then I make payment, the payment has successfully gone through and has been processed with Stripe. Now, if you go back to the shop page, and then we select two more items and go back to the checkout and fill out our shipping address information, and then click on continue. Now we are given the option to use a saved credit card. So this is what you would typically see on e-commerce sites. So if I select my saved card, so this is the card that I previously made payment with, and then I can pay with that saved card. And that payment has successfully gone through. So we're going to be building all of these features from scratch, and we're going to integrate Stripe payments into our e-commerce site. To get started, we need to bootstrap a React app. And to do that, we'll simply use the brilliant Create React App tool to build for us a React application. If you're not familiar with the Create React App tool, you can read more about it on its dedicated website here. But basically, Create React App is a tool that's been built by developers at Facebook that gives you a massive head start when building React applications. It saves you from time-consuming setup and configuration. We simply run a command. Create React App sets up the tools that are needed to start a React application. Now, I already have this installed on my machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type npx create React app. I'm going to call the project React e-commerce. And I'm going to hit return. What this is going to do is it's going to install all the dependencies that are needed for the project. And it's going to take a few minutes to do this. Now, once installed, finishing all of the dependencies, what we're going to do is we're going to cd into the React e-commerce folder. And I'm going to clear the screen here. And if we list all of the files that we have, we can see that the Create React App tool has created for us a source file or a source folder. And it's also installed all of the node modules that we're going to need for the React application. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start the React application by typing yarn start. I'm going to hit enter. What this does is it immediately starts the React application and it takes us to the browser, and we have now the React application running on localhost 3000. Now, when we have the React application started, we use the yarn command instead of npm. Now, yarn works exactly the same way as npm does, but with some slight differences. And if you don't have yarn installed on your machine and you like to follow along by using yarn, you can go to the yarn website here and just find the correct operating system. So whichever one you're using, I happen to be using Mac, and install yarn, and it works exactly the same way as the npm package manager does as well, with some slight differences, and sometimes it can be slightly faster when installing modules. So npm works exactly the same way, but I'm going to be using yarn for the React front end, and you can follow along with npm. Just make sure that you replace yarn with npm if you're using that as a package manager. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to open the React e-commerce project using Microsoft Visual Studio. Now, you can use whichever code editor that you wish, but Microsoft Visual Studio is one of the best code editors out there at the moment. So I'm going to open a new tab, and I'm going to duplicate this current tab here so that it takes me straight to the location. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type code and then followed by a full stop or a period. And this opens the React e-commerce folder in Microsoft Visual Studio. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in a new window like so. And I'm going to close the welcome message here. So if you open up the source folder here, we can see we have the boilerplate that the Create React app has created for us. Now, we're not going to need most of this stuff here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this here. And I'm just going to write React e-commerce just to start us off. And we're not going to use the logo, so I'm going to delete that like so. And I'm going to delete a few files here. I'm going to delete the app.test.js file. So I'm going to move that to trash. And I'm also going to delete the logo file as well. So I'll just move that to trash as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the app.css file here. I'm going to select everything. I'm just going to delete this as well. And I'm going to save that out. And then go back to the React application here. And if you refresh, we can see that our application is still working. So if we inspect and open the console, just to make sure we're not getting any warnings or errors there. So our React application is working just fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the terminal. I'm going to put the code editor in the middle here so I can access both easily. So now that we've deleted some of these files here, what we're going to do next is we're going to go into the index.js file, the entry point, and we're going to delete the strict mode wrapper here. Now we're going to delete this because we're going to be using the use reducer hook from React. And what the strict mode does is that it calls the action creators twice. And what that does is it creates a bug in the application in development mode only. It doesn't do this in production. So we don't really need this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the React strict mode. So I'm going to remove that wrapper from our application here. Just going to indent that slightly. And if we save that out and then go back to the web browser here, our page is still working nicely. Now, to build the e-commerce site, we're going to use Bulma as the CSS framework. Now, Bulma is an alternative to something like Bootstrap that you might have heard of before. Now, we're going to install Bulma as a dependency using the yarn package manager. So I'm going to go yarn, add, I'm going to say Bulma, and we're also going to need the node Sass because we're going to use Sass for the CSS. So I'm going to type node Sass. So what this is going to do is going to install Bulma, and it's going to also install the node Sass module for us. Once that installs successfully, that means we have the Bulma CSS framework and we also have node Sass installed in our React application. So I'm just going to clear the screen. And then if we go to our package.json file here, and just to double check that we have these here. So we've got the node Sass here, and we also have the Bulma module. So that's been installed successfully for us. So next what we're going to do is we're going to go to the app.css file, and we're going to rename this to app.scss to make it a Sass file. So I'm just going to rename that to app.css. And now this is going to be a CSS file that we're going to be using going forward. So we're going to do a few things here. So we're going to first set the character set. So I'm going to type char set, and we're going to set that to UTF-8. And then with Bulma, the good thing about it is that we can import the things that we need. So we don't have to import the whole Bulma module here, which can make your final bundle quite large. So we're only going to import the things that we're going to be using for this project. So we're going to import a few files. So these are the files that we're going to need for our project here. So we're going to import the utilities, the button, and the container, and the hero components of the Bulma framework. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do a few things here. So we're going to add some CSS. So I'm going to add this really quickly because we really want to be focusing on the React e-commerce side of things, and we're not really going to be focusing on the CSS as much. So I'm going to be putting lots of CSS code in here, and then we're going to briefly go over what each part is actually doing. So this just to save us time in terms of the development. So here I've added some CSS to the app.scss file here, and it's just going to do some basic things here. So we're going to go over what some of the main things are doing. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a container, and we're going to set that to 60%, and we're also going to have a few buttons that we're going to be using later on. So we're going to have like a shop now button, and we're going to have a featured product section as we saw in the preview. And we're going to be obviously targeting different viewports. So we're going to target the desktop, and we're also going to target mobile as well. And then if you continue on down here, we're going to have the button styles. So the button is going to be black with the font color going to be white. And we're also going to be targeting the mobile, and we're also going to target the desktop versions of that as well. So if you continue down here, that's what we're going to see here. So we're just going to see some of the styles for the desktop and also some of the styles for the mobile viewports as well. So that's the app.scss file sorted for us. So in the last video, we renamed the app.css file to be an app.sass file. And that's the error that we're getting here. So if you're getting a similar error and you haven't fixed it just yet, you need to make sure that you call the proper file name. So it's now called app.scss. And if you save that out, then we should no longer be getting that same error. Now you might be getting another error, something like this, that says that Node Sass version 5 is incompatible with 4.0. Now that's an error to do with the Node Sass loader. So this issue is to do with the version being upgraded. So to fix this issue here, we're going to uninstall Node Sass, and we're going to install the previous version because the version number 5 seems to have some issues along with it. So we're going to go into our terminal here, and I'm going to stop the React application. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say yarn uninstall Node Sass. I'm not using npm Node Sass. And what this is going to do is going to remove the Node Sass, or because we had the version which is 5.0. And if you look on the package.json file here, so we removed it now, but that's the version that we had on there. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this version. So we're going to say this is the version that we want. So I'm going to copy that here, and we're going to do yarn add, and then we're going to paste that in, and obviously that's the version that we would like to install. So it's going to take a sort of few minutes for that to install. once that's installed, we can now restart the React application. So if I do yarn start here, and then this should restart our React application. So I'm just going to wait for it to create the server. Yep. And it seems to be loading our React app just fine. So at the time of this recording here, so there seems to be an issue with Node SAS version 5.0. So if you have that installed and you get this error, just make sure to uninstall it and install the previous stable version, and that should remove the error with the Node SAS. What we're going to do now is we're going to create a components folder inside of the source folder here, and that's going to hold all of our components that we're going to create for our React application. So I'm just going to make sure the source folder is highlighted here, and I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this components. And inside here, what we're going to do is we're first going to start working on the header component. So I'm going to create another folder, and I'm going to call this the header. Now, for each component, we're going to create a separate folder, and that folder is going to contain the JSX file, and it's also going to contain the SAS file as well, and any other files that that component needs. Just helps the structure and makes everything sort of nice and neat. Now, inside of the header folder, what we're going to do is we're going to create the header.jsx. So I'm going to say new file. I'm going to say header.jsx, and we're also going to need a style sheet. So we're going to say header.styles.jsx as well. So I'm going to say new file, header.styles.sas. So now we have a header.jsx and we have a header.styles.sas as well. Now, just before we start working on the header component, what I'd like to do is I'd like to install a dependency, because we're going to be using a React router, and I'm going to install that first. So I'm just going to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say yarn add, and we're going to add the React router module here. So React router DOM, because we're going to be using it for the web, and that's just going to add the React router to our React application. So it shouldn't take too long to install. Now, whilst that's installing, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the app.js file here. No, in fact, we're going to go to the index.js file rather, and we're going to import the React router DOM, and that should have installed now. So I'll just double check the package.json file. And if we look here, we have the React router installed for us. So I'm just going to close this here. And inside the index.js file, what I'd like to do is I'd like to import the React router DOM. So I'm just going to import that. And I'm going to pull off the browser router, because we need this to wrap our components. So it's going to come from React router DOM. And we're going to wrap this around our app here. So we're going to say browser router, and we're going to cut this here and stick it inside. Now, once we save that out and we go to the localhost here and just refresh, and again, we're going to open the console, just make sure we don't have any errors. So that seems to be working fine. Everything is working correctly. Now, once we have our React router in place now, it means that we can use any of the React router elements. So we can use the link, we can use the with router and so on, and we're not going to get that error. So I'm going to go back to the header.jsx file. And what we're going to do now is going to start building the header. So the first thing we're going to need to do is obviously import React from React. And we are also going to import the link element from the React router, because we're going to be having links that are going to go to different pages. And then we are also going to import the style sheet as well. So we're just going to do an import for that. We're going to assign it to a variable, and it's going to be called header.styles.sas. So just make sure that's spelled correctly here. And we are now going to create our function. So we're going to call this header, and then we are going to create our arrow function, and we're going to return some JSX. So our header is going to be really simple. So we're going to have a nav component, and we're going to give this a class name, and we're going to call this nav-menu. And we're also going to use the container from Bulma. So obviously we've imported some of the utility CSS files already, and that includes the container. So just to give us some basically spacing and some layout on the page. So that's coming from Bulma. And inside here, we're going to have a logo, and we're going to give this a class name of logo. And inside the logo, we're going to use the link element, and the link is just going to return an anchor tag as output for the HTML, and this is going to point to the root page. And inside this, we're just going to have a text as our logo. So we're going to keep things really simple, and then we're also going to have an unordered list to contain our links, and then again we're going to use the link component, and this is going to point to the home page. So again, it's going to be on the root there, and inside here we're just going to type the home. So I'll just indent that correctly. So I just forgot to wrap this in a list element so that we get it as a link. And then I'm just going to copy this again, and I'm going to paste that in here, and we're going to have a shop. So we're going to have a shop page just to start off with, and that's going to point to the shop route, which we're going to set up a bit later on. So this sets up a basic nav for our React e-commerce. Now I'm going to export this, export default header, and just make sure everything looks okay. Now we need to show this element, or show this component rather. So we need to go and import this in. So just before the CSS import, I'm going to import my header. So I'm going to import header, and it's going to come from the components folder now, because that's what we have. And then go into the header folder, and then I'd like to grab the header component that we created, and then we're going to stick this in here. Save that out so it looks correct here, and if you refresh the page, we have a simple header, or we have a simple nav menu that we're going to obviously add some styling to in the next video. So previously we added the header component, but we don't have any styles applied to it. So that's what we're going to do right now. So if you go back to Visual Studio, and if you go to the header.jsx here, you'll notice that we've already added some classes. So we have the nav menu logo, and what we're going to do is we're going to target these classes, and we're going to apply some styling to the header. So we're going to start off with the nav menu. So we're going to target that first, and we're going to set the display to be flex, because we want this to be working on mobile views as well. So, and we're also going to give it a padding of 1 rem all round, and we're going to apply a style to the anchor elements as well. So what we'd like to do is to remove the text decoration, so we don't want that, and we're also going to remove some of the default focus, visited, and hover styling. So we're going to start with the focus, and then we're also going to target the hover and the visited styles as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the color to be black, like so. So just some basic styling here. So if you go back here, and seem to have an error, so let's have a look. So we've got focus and hover visited. Okay, so it should be working fine. Okay, so I think might be some issues with the Sass or Node Sass here, but we'll have a look at that. And so we've got the hover visited and the focus to have a color of black. Next, what I like to do is I like to target the logo. So we're going to target that, and we are going to give it a font size, and let's set this to 1.5 rem. And if we go back here, so that just increases the size of the logo text. And what we're going to do now is we're going to style the links. So they're currently not looking like links, so we're going to remove the list style. So we don't really want any list style at all, and we're going to give it a margin of 0 to start off with, And then we're going to give margin left to each of the list items. And we're going to set that to auto. And as for the individual list items themselves, we're going to set the display to be inline block so that we can apply some margin. And we're going to give that a margin of top and bottom is going to be 0, and we're going to apply 1 rem to the left and right side. So that's looking good. So if you now go back here, and we should now have this styling here. So I'm just going to obviously have a look at the Node Sass issue. You might be having the same issue that I'm having, that it's not really loading the changes on from the Sass file. So obviously this is obviously to do with Sass, and they've sort of been applying some updates to that. But yeah, this basically completes the styling for our component. So for the first header component, and next what we're going to do is we're going to add a cart component, and we're going to be putting that just next to the links here. So we're going to do that in the next video. We now have a header component, and we've got the nav menu inside it. So the next thing we need to do is we need to add a cart icon. And for that, we're going to use a shopping bag. So I've got the shopping bag icon from this link here, and it should be included in the resources for this course anyway. I'm going to also include the link as well. So we're going to use this cart icon here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a assets folder. So if I go to my React e-commerce here, so I've got the shopping bag PNG image here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of stick that inside here, and inside the source folder, I'm going to create a assets folder. So I'm going to put it in source first, and then I'm going to create a new folder here, and we're going to call it assets. And inside this folder, we're going to place all of our assets. So we're going to place all the PNG files and so on. So I'm going to move that in there, and we should now have an assets folder in our project. So it should be in there, and we have the shopping bag icon inside. So now to create a cart icon, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new component for that. So inside the components folder, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it cart icon. And inside the cart icon, we're going to have the cart icon JSX. And we're also going to have a style sheet to go with it. So we've got the cart icon and the style sheet to go along with it. So as for the cart icon itself, what we're going to do is we're simply going to use an image, and we're also going to have a span element to show the amount. So let's see how that's going to work. So we're going to first import React, and we are going to import the shopping bag icon. So we're going to say import, and we're going to call this shopping bag. And that's going to come from the assets folder. So we're inside the cart icon, so we need to go out of that, out of the components, and then into assets, and then we need to get the shopping bag, shopping-bag.png file here. So that should be correct. And we're also going to import the style sheet that we created. So we're going to import that from the same folder. So it's going to be cart icon.styles.sass, and now we're going to create our cart icon component. So say cart icon, and what we're going to do is we're going to return some JSX as usual. We're going to create a div. We're going to give this div a class name of cart container, because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be containing our cart. So cart container, and we are going to put an image inside here, and the source is going to come from the shopping bag. So we already have that imported, so we're going to set that as the source. I'm going to give it an alt attribute as well, and we're going to say that this is just a shopping cart icon. So that loads our image as the cart icon, and we're also going to have a span. So this span here is going to contain the amount. So if you've seen the cart icons before on certain React e-commerce websites, you will see that they have the cart and they have the amount right next to it. So this is what this span is going to be serving, and we are going to just basically put a hard-coded value in here, and later on, obviously this is going to be dynamic. It's going to come from the actual amount or the number of items that the user has in the cart. So we're going to give this a class name, and we're going to set this to cart count, because that's what it's going to be. And we'll set that to 5, and we're going to export this. So export default, the cart icon, and we have that here. Now obviously we need to use this file here, and what we need to do is we need to go into the header, and we need to import the cart icon. So we're going to say import cart icon from, so it's going to be in the same folder here, but it's going to be in the cart icon folder, and it's going to be the cart icon component that we want, and we're going to place it just after the links here. So we're going to say cart icon. I'm going to put it in here, and if you save that out, and if you go to the web page here, so we're getting an error, so I can't resolve shopping bag.png. Okay, so we've got an error with our cart icon. So if you go back to the cart icon.jsx file, and let's just make sure we've got the path correct. So we are inside the cart icon. So if you come out of the cart icon once, and then we come out of the components folder, and then we want the assets folder, and then we want shopping bag.png. So should be correct. So we've got the right naming here. Okay, it turns out that we have the cart icon folder inside of the header, which we don't want. So what we're going to do is we're going to move that into the components folder. And once it's inside there, then we should have the cart icon and the header side by side like this. And previously the error was because the cart icon folder was inside the header, which we don't want. So that should resolve our error. And yeah, so this is now loading our cart icon as expected. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to apply some styles to the cart icon. So what we want to do obviously is to decrease the size of that item there, because it's quite large on there. So we're going to target the cart container, and we're going to give it a margin of left. And we're going to set this to auto because we want to put it next to the links. And we're going to set a cursor, so we're going to set that to pointer. So when the user hovers over it, we want to be able to click that later on and take us to the cart page. And we are going to apply some styling to the image. So obviously we're going to set its width to make it a lot smaller than it is at the moment. And we're also going to target the cart count. So this is the number. And for this, we're going to give it a margin left. And I'm going to set it to a negative value so that it sticks right up against the shopping bag icon. And we're going to give it a background color. And we're going to set this to black. And we're going to give the color, the text color, to be white. So that's going to be the number. And then we're going to give it some padding right. And we'll set that to about 4 pixels. So we can sort of play around with these figures here just to make sure until we sort of get it right. And I'm going to give it a border radius, and we're going to set that to 10 pixels. So that looks about right. So now if we go back to the page here, so we have the cart icon and we have the number 5 that we hard coded in, but it's not exactly how we want it. So it's not sticking right next to the cart icon image. So what we can do is we can apply some trial and error here. So we're going to inspect that. So in the cart container, we have margin, yes, because we don't have the pixel. So we only had the numeric value, so that's why that was showing up like that. So yep, so that should fix that here. So we have the cart icon and we have the cart count right next to each other. So you typically see this on e-commerce sites. So you have the shopping cart, and then you have the item numbers, or the number of items that the user has in their cart in there. So this is our headers coming along nicely here. And next we're going to work on the hero section of the React e-commerce site. So now for the hero section, what we want to have is we want to have an image for the background. Now for that, we're going to make use of the hero component from Bulma. But before doing that, we need to have a few things in place. So in the assets folder, what I've done is I've added the Ben White Unsplash image, and this is the image that we're going to use as the background. So make sure that you have that image in the assets folder. Now what we need to do is we need to create a hero component, and for that we're going to create a hero folder inside of the components. So I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it hero, and inside here we're going to create the files. And we're going to create our SAS file like so. Now for the component, what we're going to do is we're going to make use of the hero layout here. So if you go to layout in the Bulma documentation and we go to hero component, and if we scroll down, what we'll see is that we can have a nice hero background or a nice hero component here. And the HTML for that, including the CSS classes, is right here. So we're going to be making use of this in our hero component. So if we create our hero component now, and we import the style sheet, I'm going to have const hero, and I'm going to return. Now in here, what we're going to do is we're going to return this particular component. So what we're going to do is we're going to return this section, and we're going to put that in here, and just going to indent this, just make sure it's correctly indented. And we're going to replace obviously the class attribute, make sure that we have class name for React. And now what we're going to do is we're going to sort of customize it. So we don't really want to have the title to be a large title, so we're going to replace that with Bags Reimagined for Modern Life. And we're also going to be not needing the subtitle, so instead we're going to have a div, and it's going to be a container for a button, and the button is going to simply read shop now. I'm going to put that all in caps, and we're going to give this a class name. I'm going to call this shop now button. Okay, and we're also going to apply some class name to the button itself. So we want the button to inherit from the button styles from Bulma, and we're also going to use the black version, and that's also going to come from Bulma. What we're also going to do is we're going to add an ID to apply some custom styles to our button as well. So we're going to use that from the app.css file that we created earlier on. So that's where this is coming from. Now if we save this out and we export this, so export default hero, and then if we now go into the app.js file and we import that in here, so input hero from the components folder, and then I'm going to have hero like so, and I'm going to say hero, I'm going to put that in after the header here. And now if you go back to our React app, and we should now see our hero component. So this is coming up nicely. So what we want to do now is we want to have the image as the background, and for that we're going to do that in the CSS. So if you go back into the style sheet for hero, and the first thing that we need to do is we need to apply some styles to the hero image. So we need to make sure that we have a custom class applied here. So we're going to say hero image. Now this is going to be our own custom class here, so this is not coming from Bulma, and we're going to target that here, and I'm going to say hero image. And what we want to do is we want to set the image as a background, so we're going to use the background short version. So instead of having several different properties, we're just going to have the background, and we're going to have it in one go. So we're going to use the linear gradient function. We're going to use this because what we want to do is we want to have the image to have a layer, which is a dark layer. I'm going to use that dark layer just to make sure that it's easier for the user to read the text that's in front of it. So we're going to use the RGBA function, and we're going to say 0, 0, 0. I'm going to give it an opacity of 2. And then we're going to use RGBA again, and we're going to use the same exact values as we've done here. So I'm going to copy that, paste that in here. And then what we're going to do is now we're going to use the URL function to load the image in. So it's in the assets folder, and then it's going to be the Ben White unsplash.jpg. That's the one that we want. Now, what we want to also do is we want to center the image, and we also want to cover it, or we want it to cover, and then we don't want the image to repeat. So we're going to say no repeat as well. So if we save this out, make sure we're importing the style sheet in the hero.jsx, which we are. And then if you go back to our React app here, and it loads our image nicely as a background. And as you can see here, it's got a slight dark layer just to make the text, which is going to be in the color of white, just to make it easier to read. Now, what we also want to do is we want to center align the title, and we want to also center align the Shop Now button as well. So that's what we're going to do next. So if we go back into the style sheet, and then for that, we're going to target the hero title class. So in H1, we're going to rename this. So we're going to say hero and then title. So this is our own custom class. We don't want to use a title from Bulma. And we're going to target that here. So hero title. And then we're going to set the text align to be center. And we want the font size to be 2 rem, like so. And for the larger desktop views, what we want to have is we want the font size to be a bit bigger. So we're going to use a media query for that. And we're going to target the breakpoint of 1024 pixels for that. And we're going to set the hero tile. I'm going to set its font size to 0.5 rem. And we also want to give some styling to the Shop Now button. So we're going to target that. And what we're going to do is we're going to center align that as well. So if we save that out and go back to our page here. So this nicely center aligns the title, and it also center aligns the button. So we now have a very nice looking hero section. And what we're going to do is we're going to continue, and we're going to add the main middle section. So now we have the header section, and we also have the hero section. Now the next part is to build the main middle section, which comes under the hero part. Now for that, we're going to need a image. So make sure we have the studio bag PNG file in the assets folder. Now for this, as usual, we're going to create its own folder. So we're going to call this main section. And inside the main section, we're going to have the main section component. And we're also going to have the accompanying style sheet for this. So main section.styles.sass. And for this component, we're basically going to display a image, and we're going to display a description and a title. So import React. And we're also going to import the with router, because what we want to do is we want to navigate to the single product view when a button is clicked. So I'm going to import that as well. So with router from React router DOM, and we're also going to import the image. So it's going to be out of the main section, out of the components, and into assets, and we want studio bag.png. And finally, we're going to import the style sheet. So it's going to be main section.styles.sass. We're going to have const main section. And we're immediately going to pull off the history object from the with router, which we're going to be exporting it out later on. So we're going to pull that off here. And we're going to return some JSX. So I'm going to have a few divs because we're going to have a image and we're also going to have a description. So we want them side by side in the desktop view and we want them to stack in the mobile view. So we're going to create some div containers for that. And for the main one, it's going to be the container. So we're going to give this a class name and we're going to call this one main section container. And this one is going to be the main section middle because we're also going to have a featured section as well, or featured collections. So it's a main section middle. And we're also going to have the image container as well. So this is going to be our container for the image. So call that ms image. And inside here, we're going to use the image that we imported. So the source is going to be the studio bag. And we're going to give it an alt attribute. And we're going to call this studio bag. Okay, so now we have the image. Now just below that, we're going to have the description. So we're going to create another div. And we're going to give this a class name. I'm going to call this the middle section, and it's obviously going to be holding a description, so that's what we're going to do here. And the description is going to contain a H2 heading, and this is going to be the studio bag, or we're just going to say designed for fashion, crafted for sport. I'm going to put full stop there, and we're going to have a short description here, and I'm just going to get the description that we already have, and we're going to stick that in here. So yeah, that's our description. I mean, obviously it's a product, so each product is going to have sort of different description. We could put some filler text here, but it just makes sense to just put something that makes sense that we can use. So that's the description, and under this one here, we're going to have a button. And we're going to give this a class name, and we're going to use the button from Bulma, and we're also going to use is black. We also like to have an ID as well. We're going to say shop now, and when this button is clicked, we're going to go to the studio bag single product view. So we haven't done that page yet, but we're going to create a single product view where you can view a single product or single bag, and you can look at the description and add it to your cart. So we're going to do an on-click handler here, and when it's clicked, we want to execute a function, and we want to basically programmatically route that to the single product view page. So that's going to push it to product, and it's going to be the first product. So this is going to be the ID of the product, which we're going to have later on as well. So we're going to put studio bag as the text for the button. And if we save this out, and we're going to export with router, export default with router, because we want to get the history object to be injected. So export default with router. And what we're going to do now is go to the app.js file, and we're going to import the main section. So import main section from, and that's in the components folder, main section, and we want the main section component, and we're going to put that in here. So main section like this. Now if you save this out and we go to our React app, so now we have our image and we have the title and the description of the product itself. So next what we're going to do is we're going to apply some CSS. So now we're going to apply some CSS to the main section here. So obviously we want to decrease the image size, and looks like one of our styles or one of our classes not being applied from Bulma. So let's apply some CSS. So first of all, let's go over the button. And it looks like we want is black here. So we don't want is Bulma. So we want is black. And if we save that, Yes, so now we're getting the correct styles from Bulma. Now if you go to the style sheet here, so we're going to target the main section first. Main section container. And what we're going to do is we're going to set a width, and we're going to set this to be 70%. And we're going to have a margin, and top and bottom is going to be 3 rem, and we want to sort of center it, and we're going to do auto. So we're going to now look at the H2 heading. I'm going to give that a font size of, let's say, 1.1 rem. And we're also going to style the description. So it's MSM description. And that's going to be in a p tag here. So we're going to give that a font size, and I'm going to set that to 0.933 rem. And what we're going to do is we want to space that out somewhat. So we're going to give it a line height property. I'm going to set that to 1.5. And so this is going to be the styles for the sort of mobile, and we want to target the desktop view only. So what will happen is we want the image and the description to be next to each other. So for that, we're going to use a media query, the breakpoint of 1024 pixels, as we've been doing already. And we're going to target the main section middle. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the display to flex. So what we're targeting here is the main section middle. So it's basically this div here. So we're going to set its display property to be a flex, and then we're going to use justify content, and we want space between. And what we're going to do next is we're going to target the image. So I'm just going to put space between that there. And for the image, we're going to give it a max width. So right now it's massive. We're going to give it a max width of 545 pixels. And we're going to say flex 1 and the baseline of 545 pixels. And if we save that out, and then now we're going to go into the description. So MSM description. And for this, we're going to give it a margin left, and we're going to set this margin to around about 30 pixels. And we're going to align self this. So what we want it to do is we want it to align in the middle. So we're going to say align self center, and we're going to also target the description. And in the desktop view, we want that to be 1.1. So at the moment it's 0.9. So we want it to be slightly bigger. I'm going to set it to 1.1 rem, and that should do the styles for our page here. So yeah, it just takes a bit to load. So we have the image, and we have the title here, and we have the description, and we have the studio bag. So obviously clicking on this at the moment is going to try and take us to the product one single product view, which we haven't set up just yet, but we're going to do that in just a moment. So now we're going to create a products context, and the product context is going to hold a list of products for us. Now in our source folder, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it shop. And inside of the shop folder, we can create a single index.js file. And this index.js file is going to contain a list of products. I've already provided this file with the resources. So I'm going to add that in here. And it's going to contain objects, and each object represents a product, and each product is going to have an ID, a title, description, image URL, and the price of that product. So if you save this out, and at the bottom here, we are exporting this shop data variable. Now in the source folder, I'm going to create a new folder, and it's going to hold all of the contexts. I'm going to create a new context. I'm going to call this products context. Now the products context is going to load the shop data, and it's going to attach that data as a value to the value prop in the context. So let's see how that works. So we're going to need the create context function from React because we're going to create a context. And we also need the state. So we're going to pull that off from React. And we also need the shop data that we just exported. So we're going to say import shop data. And that's going to come from our shop data folder. So we need to come out of the context folder, go into the shop folder, and it's going to be inside that index.js file. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a products context and we're going to export it because we're going to use that same context later on in any component that needs to use the products list. So I'm going to say export const. I'm going to call it products context. And we're going to call the create context function. And this creates the product context for us. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to now create a products context provider. So this is going to be a component. And this component is going to take a single prop, which is going to be the children. And inside here, what we're going to do is we're going to create or initialize the products by using the use state. So we're going to say const, and then we're going to have products, and then we're going to say use state. And we're going to initialize it with the shop data that we just loaded in. So notice that we are not giving a function to update the state here because we're only going to use the shop data from that list. But if we were to link with an external API, we could easily add a function here after making a call, for example, then we could update the product list. But we're not going to do that right now because we've got the list that we have and we're just going to be using that one. So what we're going to do next is we're going to return some JSX and we're going to return the product context provider. So we're going to say products context, which is this one here. And we're going to say dot provider because it's going to be the context. And then it takes a value prop and we're going to set that to be the products here. So we're going to use the shorthand way for writing the object. And we're going to then return the children. And now we're going to export out. So quickly go over what's happening here. So we're importing the shop data. So that's that list and it's coming from here. And what we're doing is we create a context and we're calling it products context. And then we are initializing the shop data to be the products list here. And then we export out or we return the products context provider and we provide the products as a value and return the children as the prop that's passed in. So we're not done yet. We need to go into the index.js file, this one here, the entry point, and we need to import the products context that we just created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this just to make it easier. And what we're going to do is we're going to say import the products context provider. I'm going to import that from the context. So we're in the index.js file, so we don't need to go anywhere. So we're going to context and we want the products context file like so. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to wrap the app component. I'm going to cut that there, put that in there. And when we save that out and we go to our React app here, just refresh just to make sure that we're not getting any issue here. So that means everything is working just fine. And just quickly go over what's happening here. So we've got our products context provider, which is the context here, and we're wrapping our app component. And what this means is that any component that's nested, however deeply nested it is, will have access to the product context provider. And it means that they can reach out into the products context and use the shop data list. So this is going to be really useful because it means that we don't have to pass down any props in any intermediary components. So it's really useful here. So now we have the products context. What we want to do next is we want to create a featured product component. Now this component is going to display a single product and we're going to be reusing this component later on. So if you go back to the components folder and inside here, we're going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this shared. Now inside the shared folder, we're going to create the featured product component. Now we're going to reuse this component, so that's why we're putting it inside of the shared folder. Now it's going to need a style sheet as well. Now the featured component is simply going to take an image, a title, and the price. And it's also going to have a button to enable the user to add it to the cart. So, and then we're going to import the style sheet. And it's going to take a single product as the argument or as a prop. And it's going to return the image, the title, and the price. So we're going to pull off the title, and we're going to pull off the image URL, and we're also going to pull off the price, and that's going to come from the product prop that's going to be passed in. So we're going to return some JSX. So we're going to return a div, and we're going to have the image container. So it's going to be the featured product as the class name. And this is going to be the container for the image. So it's going to be featured image as the name. And then under the image, we're going to have another div, and this is going to contain the title of the product or the name and the price as well. So we're going to use that. We're simply going to use the h3 as the title, and that's going to say title. And under that, we're going to have the price. So we're going to use a p tag for that. Give it a bit of space. And then finally, we're going to have the button to allow the user to add that product to the cart. So we're going to use the button, and it's going to be black. And we're going to use our own custom styles. I'm going to use the Nomad button for that. And then it's going to simply say add to cart, like so. Now go back to the image. And for the image, we're going to use the source, and that's going to come from the image URL. Close that off and give it a alt tag, and it's simply a product. So I'm going to say that, and we're going to now export this out, export default. So takes in the product, and we're pulling off the title, the image, the price, and we're simply going to return that as the values inside of the markup. Okay, so now that we have that, what we're going to do next is we're going to add some styles quickly. So we're going to go into the style sheet for this, and we're going to target the featured product. And most of the styles are going to come from the app.sas file that we initialized earlier on. So we're going to give this a border, and we're going to set that to 1 pixels, and we're going to make it solid RGBA, and we're going to give it a shade. I'm going to set the opacity to 0.125, and we're going to give it some padding, and we'll set that to 1 rem all round. And finally, we're going to add a margin top and bottom, set that to 1, and left and right, we're going to set that to 0. So that should take care of our featured product component. Now we're going to use this featured product to return some featured bags that we're going to list under the middle section here. And we're going to do that in the next video. So in the last couple of videos, we've been doing some prep work for the featured collection section for the homepage. And now we're going to actually create that component, and we're going to display 4 different bags as the featured collection. So we're going to go back into our code editor here, and I've just noticed that we've misspelled the class name. So I'm just going to correct that before moving on. So it should be class name. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create the featured collection component. Now for that, it's going to contain its own folder. So inside the components, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call this featured collection. Featured collection. And inside of this, we're going to have a single file. We're going to say featured collection .jsx. We're not going to create a style sheet because most of the styles for the featured collection are already included in the SAS file. So all we need to do is create the actual component, and we're going to inherit the styles from the SAS file that we created earlier on. So for this, we're going to create the featured collection component. So we're going to import React. And we're also going to import the use context. So this is where we're going to use the product context that we created earlier on. And we're also going to import the product context. So that's going to be products context, and that's going to come from the product context file. So we're going to need to come out of this file and then come out of the components and then go into context and products context here. So what we're doing here is we're essentially importing this context that we created earlier on, because we're going to use that context and we want to get the products from that list that we imported from the shop data. And then we're finally going to import the featured product component that we just created. And that's going to be in the shared folder. So out of the current folder into shared. And then we want the featured product component like so. Okay, so now we're going to have const featured collection. And then we're going to create the products. So for this, we're going to pull off the products, and that's going to come from our context. So we're going to say use context, and we're going to pass in the products context that we imported. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to loop over each of these products, and then we're going to only return the first four. So we're going to call this product items. And what we're going to say here is that we only want the first four. So we're only going to return where the index is less than 4, because we only want to return 4 items here. And then we're going to map over that. And then we're simply going to return the featured product component, and we're going to pass it the product. And it needs a key as well. So we're going to say, so let's finish off the spreading. And then we're going to give it a key property. And we're going to say product.id as the key. So now we're going to return the featured collection component. So we'll return some JSX inside here. And we're going to have a div. And then we're also going to have a h2 title. And that's going to contain the featured collection as the title. And then we're going to have a div to hold our products. So we're going to simply use the product items map that we just created. So the new array that's coming in with the featured product items. And we're only going to have 4 of those. So I'm going to now apply some classes. And we're going to apply a class name to the h2 heading. And we're going to give the container for the products class name of products, like so that you can apply the CSS. And then we're simply going to export. Now we want to display this, so what we're going to need to do now is go into the app.js file, and then we're going to import the featured collection. Component, and we're going to return that under the main section. So we're going to include that in here. We'll close that off and go to our app. And here we have our featured collection component. So it seems that some of our CSS styling is not working, but we are loading in the products and we're using the product context just fine. So we have a slight issue with the CSS here. So it's not loading the CSS from the SAS file. And if you go back into the featured collection here, what's happening is that there needs to be a space between the featured collection and the container because they're two different classes. So the featured collection comes from the app.sas file that we created earlier on and in the beginning. And the container is going to come from the Bulma framework. So they're two separate classes here. So we've joined them together with a hyphen. Now, if we save this out, when it reloads, we can see that we have the featured collection component now nicely displaying in our homepage. So if you've spotted that error already, that's great. If not, then just make sure that you have a space between featured collection and the container and you save that out and you should have the featured collection component displaying correctly. So now that we have the featured collection component, the next final piece for the homepage is to create a footer. Now for the footer, it's going to be really simple. All we're going to have is the name of the store, the copyright symbol, and the year. So let's go into the components and we're going to create a footer folder. And inside here, we're going to have the footer and the style sheet. So we're going to do the usual. We're going to import React. And we're simply going to return the JSX. So we're going to have a div. And inside this div, we're going to have the copyright symbol, the year, and the name of the store. So let's do the year first. So to get the year, we're going to have a const year. And we're going to make use of the date. So we're going to say new date. And we're going to get the full year. So we're going to call that function. So that gives us the year there. So what we're going to do is we're going to say the year. And then we're going to have the copyright symbol. So we're simply going to do that like this. And the name of the store, Nomad. And that's all we're going to have in there. And then we're going to export out the footer. And as for the style sheet, all we need to do is we need to set the whole thing to the middle. So we're going to give it a width. Set that to 50%. And we'll give it margin. And we'll set that to auto. And also text align all the text inside there. And just make sure we have the class name footer on the div. So put that in there. So save that out. Now, obviously, we need to put this into the app. So if you go to app.js file and import the footer. And it's going to go right at the bottom here. Save that out. And if you go to our page here, we should have a simple footer right at the bottom. We're going to set up some routing in our app. But before we do that, we need to create a layout component that will contain the header and the footer for our site. This component will then wrap any other components that we create and give them a header and footer sections. It will also give us the flexibility to add or remove the header or footer from any feature components that we deem do not need this. Now, back into our VS Code, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file. And since it's going to be a shared component, we're going to put it inside the shared folder. So I'm going to create a layout component. And inside the layout component, we're going to import the header and the footer. So before doing that, we need to import React. So we now have the header and the footer. So we're going to create the layout component now. And we're simply going to return the header, and we're going to have a main element, and inside that we're going to return the children. So we need to pull that off from the props, And what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this in a fragment, because we don't really want to have a div to surround the header and the footer. So we're just going to use the fragment. I'm going to close that off here. And inside of this, we're first going to return the header. And then we're going to have a main element. And inside the main is where we're going to return the children. Now, under the main, we're going to return the footer component. So you can imagine this to have any component being passed in. It's going to have the header and the footer inside it, or the header above it or the footer below it. The next thing we need to do is we need to export this layout component. Now that we have the layout component, we also need a homepage component that's going to contain the hero section, the main section, and the featured collection section, just exactly as we have things at the moment. So for that, we're going to create a homepage component, and we're going to put that in the root of the components folder. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it homepage. And for this, I'm going to need the hero, main section, and featured collection components. So let's do the usual and import React first. And then we're going to need the layout component, which is created. And we're also going to need the hero, main section, and featured collection components. So just make sure we have the hero, that's the hero folder, and then from there we want the hero component. And then now we're going to create the homepage. So once again, we're going to make use of the fragment. And then we're going to have layout. And inside the layout, we're going to return the hero. And under that, we have the main section. And then finally, we have the featured collection section. Now export this homepage out. Save that out. And the layout has already been done for us. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to go into the app.js file. And inside here, what we're going to do is we're going to set up the roots for our app. So what we're also going to need is the switch and the root components from the React router DOM. So let's get that now. Pull off switch, and I'm going to pull off root. We don't need any of this because we already have the homepage. So we're going to delete everything inside here. And we're simply going to return the switch. And inside the switch, we're going to have a root component, or we're going to have the root path. We're going to have the exact prop as well. That's the exact root that we want to match. And the component that we want to render is going to be the homepage component. So we're not going to need any of these. So I'm just going to delete all of that. I'm going to say import homepage and go into the components. And then we're going to grab the homepage. And we're going to set that as the component that we want to render for that root. And now if we save everything out and go to our React app, I'll find the layout component in the homepage. So if we go back to the homepage, so homepage is here, and you can't find the layout. So the layout component is going to be in the shared folder. So we need to go into the shared, and then it's going to be the layout component. Now refresh, and can't find the footer component. Go to the layout component, and then into footer, and we need to do the same thing for the header as well. So if we save that out, and because we have the product 1 from previously, that root is not there at the moment. Now when we save everything out and we go to the root page, we're getting exactly as we were getting previously. So that's going to lead us to the next step. So we're going to create a catch-all component, or we're going to create a 404 component that gets rendered when the page or when that particular path is not found in our app. So now we're going to create the catch-all or the not found component. So for that, we're going to go into the components folder and we're going to put it in the root here. So I'm going to say new file. I'm going to call it not found. And we're first going to import React. And we're also going to need the layout component. And that's going to be in the layout. Going to have const not found. And what we're going to do is we want to have some basic styling for this. So we're not really going to create a separate style sheet because it's just going to be a couple of properties. So we're going to have a style, and we're going to say the font weight is going to be bold, and we're going to have text align. I'm going to set that to center. So just some CSS in JS, and we're going to return the layout component, and inside of the layout we're going to have a simple p tag, and we're going to say we're going to give it the style first. So it's going to be our style object, and we're simply going to say unfortunately we can't find that page. And we simply export this out. Now we go back into the app.js file, and we're going to create a root for that. So the root we're going to create is going to be a wildcard or a catch-all root. So for that, I'm going to write root, and we're going to say we're going to want the path to be any other root that we can't find. So we're going to say the asterisk, and it's going to be a wildcard, and the component we're going to show for that is going to be our not found component, which we haven't imported just yet. So I'm going to go up here, and we're going to import that in. And that's going to be in the root, so we're just going to say not found. So it's going to be inside the components folder and not found. So have that there like that. So now if we go here, and we're simply missing the /. So if we come back here now, and we're getting the layout wrong again. So if you go back to the not found component, and the layout is going to be in the shared. So we need to go into the shared folder, save that out. And now when we go to a root that doesn't exist, we have the not found component being rendered for us. So that's the 404 component taken care of. So at the moment we have our shop link here at the top. So if we click on it here, we don't have a shop component to display. So next thing we're going to do now is we're going to create a shop component. And for this, we're going to have a pages folder. Now inside of the components here, we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call it pages. And inside of the pages, we're going to have a shop folder. And we're going to have the shop.jsx and the style sheet, shop.styles.sass. Now, as for the shop component, it's simply going to use the featured product component, and we're going to display a list of all the different products that are available. So I'm just going to import React first. And we're also going to need the layout component. and that's going to be in the shared, and it's going to be layout, like so. And then we're going to have import featured component. We're going to use or featured product to display all the different products, and that's going to be out of this folder, out again into the shared, and it's the featured product we want. And we're also going to need to reach into the context so that we get a list of all the products. So we're going to import that as well. So products context. And that's going to be in context and products context. And finally, we need the style sheet. So we're going to import that in as well. Okay, so we have all of the files that we need. So now we're going to have a const shop. And this is going to be a really simple component because we're going to make use of the featured product component that we built earlier on. So we're going to first return a div, and it's going to be the main container. And then we're going to have a heading. So for that, we'll use a h2, and we're going to say shop. And then we're going to have a container for all the products. And then inside here, we're going to put in the list of all the products that we're going to be getting from the products context. So let's now use that. So we're going to first have a const products. So we're going to pull off the products from the products context. And for that, we're going to need to pull off use context from React first. So we're going to say use context. And then we're going to pass in the products context. And then this is going to give us then the products as the returning value. And then now we're going to have const all products. And then we're going to simply map over the products that we've just got from the context. And then we're going to use the featured product component, and we're going to pass it the product or the individual product that we get from the map. And then it's also going to need a key, and for that we're going to say product.id, and we're going to close that off. Now inside here we're going to basically return the all products. So it's going to be individual products that we're going to have, and they're all going to have their own separate featured product div to contain them inside. And then what we want to do now is we want to apply some class names so that later on we can apply some styles. So this is going to be the product list container. And then this is going to be the product list title. So we're going to have class name, it's going to be product, and then list title. And finally, this is going to be the product list itself. So we're going to have class name, product list, like so. And that should be about it, really. So what we're going to do now is we're going to export this. So I'm going to say export default shop. And then before applying the styles, we're going to add this to the app.js here. I'm going to create a route for it. So let's first import the shop component. So we're going to say import shop. And that's going to come from the components, and then we had the pages, and then we had the shop, and then we want a shop component from there. So we're going to have, just going to put it before the catch-all route here. So we're going to create a route path for it, and the path is going to be /shop. So that's the path that we want, and the component we're going to display is simply going to be the shop component. So we display that like so. Now, if we refresh this, and then obviously we're still at the shop component here. Now, obviously it's displaying all of the different products that we have in our products list, but what we're missing is the header and the footer that we haven't added yet. And for that, we need the layout component. So we're going to make use of that, which we didn't just here. So we're going to use the layout component, and we're going to wrap all of the different components that we have here. So we're going to take this and put them inside, just make sure they're all indented correctly. So that looks looking okay. So now we're going to save that out, and obviously when we refresh this, we should have the header, and we should have the footer component at the bottom. So it's now correctly loading our shop component, but we don't have any styles, and that's what we're going to apply in the next video. So now we're going to apply the CSS to the shop page. So if you go into the shop.styles.sass, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to target the product list container. And we're going to give this a margin first. So we're going to have top and bottom, we're going to have 3 rem, and we don't really want any margin on the left and the right. And what we're going to do next is we're going to target the list title. So I'm going to center that and give that a breathing space of a margin top. And we're going to have first a margin top. So we'll give it a bit of space, and we're going to set this to be 5 rem. So I want some nice clear space between the title and the rest of the content. And then we're going to have the text align, and we're going to simply center that. So that's the product list title. And then for the individual products, what we're going to do is we're going to give it a margin. And when the user hovers over it, we want to have the pointer. And it's going to be a div inside that. So we're going to nest that in here. And then we're going to say margin, and we're going to set that to be 1 rem. And then the cursor, we're going to set it to be pointer. Now that's the product list taken care of. Now what we also want to do is want to cover the situation where it's going to be a desktop viewport. So when it's in a larger widescreen format, we want to target the product list container. So for that, we're going to now do a media query. And what we want to do is we want to target the product list container. And we want to basically set a display value for all the product lists. So inside that, we're going to say product list. And then we're going to set the display. And we're going to set that to flex, so that they sort of line up nicely and they take up all the available space. And then we're going to use flex wrap. And we're going to set that to wrap. So when there's no space, it goes to the new line. And we're going to sort of justify the content. We want it to center. And we're going to use the align items. So we want to center everything. And we're going to center that as well. And then we're going to give it a margin. And we're going to set that to 0 for the top and bottom. And left and right, we're going to set it to 5 rem. And then we're also going to target a sort of div inside of the product list, which contains the individual product. And what we're going to do is we're going to set a flex value for that. So we're going to say 0, 0, and we're going to have a baseline of 300 pixels. So the actual size of each of the products for the featured product component. So when we save this out and we come back here, now we have a nicely styled shop page. So depending on the space available, this is how it's going to display. So if you go to a smaller viewport, then they take up the space that's available. And when you sort of stretch out, then they stretch out and take out all available space. So this is the shop page done for us. Next, we're going to create the single product view. So when you click on a particular product, it's going to take you to a page, and that's the component we're going to build next. So now we're going to create the single product view. So what we want to have is when we click on a product, when we taken to a single page that shows the image, a description of product and the price, and the option to add it to the cart like we have here. So if you go back into our components, and we're going to create a single product. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call this single product. And inside of here, we're going to create a couple of files. So we're going to first create a single product.jsx. And we're also going to have the single product style sheet to go with it. Now, as for the component itself, what we're going to need is the product, or a single product that we're going to be displaying. Now, before we display anything, we're going to need a few things. So we're going to need to check to see that a product is in the product's context. And to actually get the product, we're going to get it from the root param. So when the user clicks on a product, it's going to then go to the product like this, root, and then we're going to have the ID of the product. So if the product ID is 1, it's going to be 1. If it's 2, it's 2. and so on. So what we want to do is we want to get the root param, and we also want to check to see if that product is in the products context. So let's have a start on that. So we're going to first import React. And we're also going to need a few other things. So for now, we're going to import the products context. So it's going to be context, and then we're going to have the products context. And we're also going to need the layout because we want the header and the footer. So we're going to get layout from the shared folder. So out of this one, out of that one again, and we're going to shared. And then we're going to go to the layout like so. And then we're going to import the style sheet as well. So now we're going to create our component. So we're going to call it single product. And then what we're going to do is we're first going to get the products context. So we're going to have a products because we want to pull off a single product from here. So we're going to need the use context. So we're going to pull that off from React first. So we're going to say use context. And then we're going to say the context that we want to use is the products context. And now what we also want to do is we want to get the ID from the root param. And for that, we're going to need the router. So let's also import that as well. And we're going to export that later on and have the history object and the match.params object to be injected into the component. So we're going to import with router. That's going to come from React router DOM. Now, what we want to do is we want to pull off the ID from the params. So that's going to be match.params. And we're also going to get the match from the props that are going to get passed in. So we're going to get the match. And we also want to get the history as well, because we're going to push the user to the shop page if you can't find that product ID in the products context. So we're also going to pull that in for now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to now use the state. So once we have the ID, we're going to use the state. So we need to get use state from React. And what we're going to do is we're going to say const product because we want to set this to be the state. So const product, and then set product as the function to update it. Use state. And initially we're going to set this to null because we don't have a product when the component loads in the first go. And then what we also want to do is when the component loads on mountain, we want to check to see if the product that comes in from, or the product ID that comes in from match.params is found in the products list. So for that, we're going to need to also make use of the use effect, and we're going to pull that off React first. So we get the use effect function. And then now we're going to say use effect, and then we're going to pass a function. Now inside the in the use effect, we're going to do a find, or we're going to loop over the products array, and we're going to try to find the ID of the product that gets passed in from the match.params.id value. So let's do that now. So we're going to say const product. And then we're going to use products, which is going to be the list or the array. And then we're going to use the find method. So we want to find the ID of the match params matches any ID in the products list. So we're going to have a callback function, and then we're going to have an item here. So we can remove because it's a single parameter, we can just remove that and have it like this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, we want to make sure that it's a number. So we're going to wrap item.id because it's going to be coming from the products, and we want to make sure that it's actually a number. So we just use the number function here. So that's a native number function that we're calling, and we're putting our item.id inside it. Now what we want to do is we want to find out whether that item.id is equal to the ID that's going to come from here. So if it is, then that means that product is inside of the products list that we have. So we're also going to wrap that in the number function, and then we're going to pass in this ID here, and then we're going to make a comparison here. If that returns true, then what's going to happen is it's going to return that item and it's going to put it into product for us like that. So that's what's happening there. And then now in the use effect, what we want to do is if the product does not exist, so say we do that check here and the product does not exist, what we want to do is we want to redirect the user back to the shop page. So if product does not exist, redirect to the shop page. That's what we want to do here. So for that, we're going to do a simple if check here. And what are we going to check? We're going to check that if there's no product after doing this. So if it can't find it after doing the check for the products, if it finds it, it's going to return that product. So that's going to be a truthy value. If it can't find it, it's going to return undefined. So that's going to be false, or it's going to be a falsy value. So we're going to say if it's not there, then what we want to do is we want to return, and then we're going to redirect the user to go to the shop page. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually pull off the push function from the history object here like that. So we destruct it. So this is ES6 destructuring, and we're going to push that off, and then we're going to redirect the user to the shop page. So that's in the scenario where when it does the check, it can't find the product in the product list, and it's going to return undefined. Then what's going to happen is we're going to redirect the user to the shop page to select a product that's actually in the product list that we are selling. So that's what that is doing there. Otherwise, the happy state, what we'd like to do is we want to say we're going to now set that product that we found to be the state, and we're going to set that here using the set product. So we're going to say set product, and we're going to set it with the product that comes back in. So that's going to be product like that. So it's coming from here like this. So in the happy state, we set the product and we set that to be the state here. So product is then going to contain the product that we found from the products list from the context. So that's what this is doing here. So now what we can do now is we can now go into the return statement. And before doing that, we're going to first pull off a few things from the product that we have set in the product. And we need the image URL. And we also need the title. And we need the price and the description. And it's going to come from the product that we've set in the state there. Now, we can now return some JSX to display the single product on the single product page. So what we're going to do is we're going to now make use of the layout component. So we're going to first return, and then we're going to use the layout so that we can get the header and the footer. And inside of here, we're going to have our containing div. And then we're first going to return the image. So that's going to have a simple image element in here. And we're going to set that source to be the image URL. And it's also going to need a alt attribute. So we're going to say product. That's the alt attribute. So this is going to contain our image. And then under this, we're going to have the product details. So the description and the title. That's going to have its own div. So a containing div. And then we're going to have the div to hold the name and the price. So it's going to have a h3, and this is going to have the title. It's not doing that like that. And then we're also going to have a p tag, and this is going to contain the price. Now that we have the price, what we want to do is we also want to have some buttons to help us to add the item to the cart. And for that, they're going to have their own container. And inside, we're going to have a button. And the button is simply going to read add to cart. And it's going to be all uppercase. And then we're also going to have another button. And this button is going to enable the user to check out. So once they've added the item to the cart, it takes them to the checkout, or takes them to the cart component where they can check out and pay for the item. So I'm going to have another item, another button like this. And we're going to write here, proceed to checkout. Like so. And closing that div out there. And then what we're now going to do is we want to have a description. So for this, it's going to have its own containing tag or own containing div. and we're going to write a simple description here. And for that, we're going to pull off the description and use the description variable that we have. So we can put it on a single line. So I'm just going to use description that's coming from the product, and that's the JSX done. So what we're going to do now is we're going to apply some classes. So the class name for the first containing div is going to be single product container. So a single product. And this here contains our image. So I'm going to say product image. And now this one contains the product details. So we're going to give it a class name of product details. And now this div here contains the name and the price. So we're going to say class name is going to be name hyphen price. And then this div contains the buttons. So we're going to call this add to cart buttons. And for the buttons themselves, they're going to have a class name. And we've been using the button from Bulma. And this one is going to be white. So we're going to use the is white. And we're going to have the nomad button custom styles added to that as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to also give it the button white outline. So it's going to come from our SAS file, app.sas file. I'm going to give it an ID. I'll say button white outline. So just to customize it even further. And as for the second button, we're going to give it a class of button. So class name first. And then we're going to also have this to be a white button. We already have the white, so it's going to be black. This one, we want a black button. And we're going to have nomad button as the class. And we're also going to give it the same ID, which is going to be button white outline. So we get a white outline for this button here. So we give it that ID as well. And finally, we're going to have a class for the description container. And we're simply going to call this product description. Okay, so that's a lot of JSX there. And this is the layout for the single product component. And finally, what we need to do is we need to return, or we need to export this component here, and we need to export it out with using the with router. So what we're going to do is we're going to say export default, and it's a single product. But before doing that, we're going to say with router, and then we're going to then put in the single product, because we're using the higher order component with router here, and we'll save that out. Now what we want to do is we want to create a root for this inside of app.js. So we want to also get the param. So we want to get the root param, which is going to be ID, set to ID, and we want to get that from the match.params. So we're going into the app.js file, and what we're going to do first is we're going to import the single product. So now that we have the component, we're going to create a path for it. We're going to add it under the shop path. So root path, and this time what we're going to do is we're going to say we want the product as the path. So / product. And then we're going to basically put in the root param like this. So we're going to say whatever comes after this slash here is going to be assigned to the ID variable inside of match. And that's what this specifies here. And then we're going to say the component that we want to display here is the single product component. So single product, and finally we close that out and we save that in there. So we have our shop component and we have the root for the single product component. So now if we go to our React app here, so we're getting an error here saying that it can't resolve the layout component in our single product here. So if we go back and now we go into the layout, so we don't need to come out of it twice. So that's that one there. And then come back here. And now it's saying can't resolve single product.styles.sass. So single product.style.styles. So that's going to be with an S there. So it's typo. Now, if you save that out and our component, we don't have any errors now. So we're going to test this to, now we're going to say product 1, so that we know that we actually have a ID of 1 for our first product. So we know that that exists there. So if you go here, then we are getting an error here. So it says type error, cannot destructure property image URL of product as it is null. Okay, so our component is working just fine, but when the component loads initially, in that moment it's loading, what's happening is that the product is set to null initially, and when the component first mounts, that's going to be null. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to pull off these properties from product, and that's null to start off with initially. So it's going to be, for a moment, that's going to be null until we do this check here, and then the user effect returns the set product and then updates the product state. So in that time, what we need to do is we need to either have a spinner, so just to like have a loading component, just to until we able to either find the product or not find it and redirect the user, or once it's find it, then it's going to assign that to the product variable here. So we can either have a spinner, or what we can have is we can just sort of return null just for that moment. So we're going to say if there's no product, simply like how we do it here, instead of redirecting as we if you can't find the product, what we're going to do is we're going to return a null for now. So we're going to just return null just for that moment. So while we check for product, so this is going to be like a momentary thing here. So it's gonna, if there's no product at the moment, what we're going to do is we're going to just return null until we do the check and use effect completes that check. And once it finds the product, it's going to update that to the product state, and then we're able to run the rest of the code just fine. If it can't find it, then it's obviously going to push the user to the shop component, and it's going to push him away from this component. So if you save this out now, and it works perfectly fine. So that was a momentary thing there that we had. So we could be loading a spinner, but we're just going to return null for now. It's just what makes it sort of simpler. So we have our single product component now displaying, and the next thing we're going to do now is we're going to apply some CSS styles. So now we need to apply some styles to the single product view here, because obviously it's taken up the whole page. Now, before we do that, we're getting a few warnings in the console saying that the use effect has some missing dependencies. Now, the use effect here is using a few items here, or a few variables that we need to provide as dependencies. So it's using obviously the ID, and we need to provide that, and it's using the product, and it's also using the push function like this. So these are the three things that it's using inside. Obviously we're using the products, but that doesn't change too often. So if we now update this here, and we're saying, yep, we're missing the products, so we're going to also add that as well. So just make sure you add the ID products, ID product, push, and products, as the user effect will use this to try to figure out whether it needs to run the function depending on the update, because user effect runs after every render. So now if you go to our app here, that should remove all the warnings in the console. Right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to apply some styles. So we're going to go into the single product.style.sass file here, and what we're going to do is we're going to first target the single product container, and we're going to give some margin first. So we're going to set the margin to top and bottom, and then the left and right we're going to just leave that as 0, and then we're going to give it a margin bottom. So we want to give it a bit of breathing space from the footer. I'm going to set that to a nice 3 rem, and then we're also going to have padding all around, and we'll set that to 2 rem. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to also target the breakpoint, so the desktop breakpoint. So we want to target that and basically set the display to be flex, as we've been doing throughout all of the pages. And our breakpoint we're targeting is the 1024 on 0 to 4 pixels, and we're basically going to set the display, and we're going to use the flex value there, and we're also going to center using justified content, and we'll set the value to center, and then we want to align the items, and we're going to center that as well. And then now what we want to do is we want to target the product image next. And so we're going to type product image. And what we're going to do now is we're going to give that a flex value, and we're going to set the shrink and grow to 0, and then we're going to give it a baseline of 400 pixels like that. We also want to do that for the product details as well, so we're going to add that in. Product details, target those two classes there. Now what we also want to do is for the product image, we want to have a margin, so we're going to target that, and then we're going to give that a margin of 2 rem. And then now for the product details, that contains the name and the price, so we want to give that a margin as well. So we're going to target that product details, and then inside that we have the name class, name and the price, and then we want to give that a margin of 1 rem top and bottom, and 0 for left and right. And then we also want to target the add buttons container, or add to cart buttons. And what we want to do is we want to give that a margin 2 rem top and bottom, and left and right we'll just leave that as 0. And then we're also going to target the product description, so it's going to be product description. And then what we want to do is we want to get the p tag inside of that container, and we want to give that a line height, and we'll set that to 1.5. So this adds our CSS. So we save our file, and now when we refresh the page here, we're still not getting the styles to be applied. So now let's go back to the style sheet and let's have a look here. So we have our, okay, so we've got a typo here, so it should be single product container, so we're missing the L there. So if you save that out, now we're getting the styles to be applied to the single product page. So this is the styles completed for the single product page, and this completes our React e-commerce site. So we have a home page, we also have a shop, and now if you click on the shop item here, what we want to do is we want to be taken to the single product view. So we're going to update the featured component, and we're going to update that to take the user to that page. So if you go to our featured product, so that should be in shared, and go to the featured product here. So what we're going to do is we're going to now import the router, or with router, because we want the programmatically route the user to the single product page, and we're going to get that from React router DOM. And then now when the user clicks on the image, so we want the whole entire image, so what we're going to do is we're going to put a on-click handler on this div here. So we're going to say on click, so if the user clicks anywhere in that particular product, we want to take them to the product page. So we're going to now say we're going to pull off the history first. So we've got the product here, so what we want to do is we want to update that, and what we're going to do is we're going to update that to be props like this, and then now we're going to pull off the product from props. So we're going to say that's going to be props like that, and then we're also going to be pulling off the history as well. So we're going to pull off the history, and we need to obviously pull off the ID, so that's going to come from the props as well. So we're going to say ID like that, and then we have our title, image and price, and we're also pulling off the history because we're going to use the history.push function. Now inside the callback here, we're going to say history.push, and then we're going to take the user to the product page, and we want to obviously use the backticks here because we want to interpolate the ID variable. So what we're going to do is we're going to say / and then we're going to use the $ and then curly braces, and then what we want is the ID that we get from the props that get passed in here. So Now what we're going to do is I'm going to return the with router. Now when we save this out and we go to our React page here, and then when we click on any of the products here, it takes us to the single page product view, and it puts in the ID inside the root param, and that's where we get it for the single product view to actually get the product from the product list. So now what we're going to do next is we're going to work on the most interesting part of the React e-commerce, and that's to actually make the cart functional, because at the moment we have the number 5 hard coded. So we're going to make that functional, and that's what we're going to start working on next. We're going to start working on the most interesting part of the e-commerce app, and that's to make the cart functional. In terms of deciding how to implement a functional cart, we might think about adding Redux to our app. If you've worked on complex applications with React before, you'll know that the less tools that you add to achieve your goal, the better. Adding Redux to the app adds another layer of complexity. So it's always important to think carefully about whether you need to add Redux to your app. So you should always ask yourself, what data will Redux state help make easier to access throughout the application? Can you still achieve the same result without adding Redux? Is it possible to use React context instead of using Redux? Because now we have not only the React hooks, but we also have the context from before. So thinking about your application like this will reduce technical debt later on. And it's also going to help you to easily scale up and add more features without having to do major refactoring or rewriting certain parts of the application. As for our cart, we're not going to use Redux, mainly because we can achieve the same result without it. That is, we can use React context, React hooks, and in particular, the use reducer hook. And if you're familiar with Redux, you will find that it follows the same principles as Redux, and at times, you might actually think you're using Redux. So let's start adding the cart functionality into our app. Now, to make the cart functional, the first step is to have a cart context. Now, the cart context is going to hold the cart items, the item count, and the total. It's also going to pass down some functions to add items to the cart, to remove items to the cart, to increase items, and to decrease the item quantity. So for this, we're going to create a new file inside the context folder. So I'm going to crawl this file, cart context. And inside the cart context here, we're going to create the cart context. We're also going to create the reducer. So we're going to use the use reducer hook that comes with React. And for that, we're going to create a new file. And we're going to call this cart reducer. Now we're going to create the reducer first. So it's going to be really simple to start off with. So we're going to call it const cart reducer. And if you're familiar with Redux, it's going to take a state, and it's also going to take an action parameter. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a switch statement, and then we're going to look at the action.type. So it's going to be some action creators, and then whatever that they return, depending on that action, a certain case will be executed. So right now, we're just going to have a default statement in here, and all we're going to do is we're going to return the state. So that's all this cart reducer does to start off with. I'm going to export this. Now we have our cart reducer. Now back in the context here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a cart context, and we've already created a product context. So it's going to be very similar. So we're going to first import React, and we need the create context function. So we're going to import that as well. And we're also going to import the use reducer function because we're going to use that hook as well. And we're going to get that from React. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to also import the cart reducer that we just created. And that's going to come from the same file, and it's called cart reducer. And now we're going to export const, and we're going to create our cart context. Cart context. And we're going to say create context. And we're going to call that function. And then we're going to have an initial state. Now this initial state, we're going to pass to the use reducer hook. So we're going to have const initial state. And then we're going to create an object, and this object is just going to have the cart items, and we're going to set that initially to an empty array. And then we're also going to have the item count, so the number of items in the cart, and we're going to initialize that to 0. And we're going to have the total amount that the user needs to pay, or the customer, and we're going to also initialize that to 0. Now we're going to create the cart context provider component. Cart context provider. Now this is going to take a children prop, and what we're going to do is we're going to first create the state. So we're going to have the state, which is going to call it state, and then we're also going to get a dispatch function, and this is going to come from the use reducer hook here. So before we're using the use state and use effect, now we're going to use the use reducer. So there's quite a few hooks that are available in React now, and the first argument to the use reducer is our cart reducer that we created earlier on, and the initial state that we just had. So in Redux, you would do this inside the reducer file, but the cart reducer or the use reducer here takes the second argument as the initial state, and that's what we're passing here. So it also then returns the state. So initially it's going to be this object here, and it's going to return a dispatch function. Now this dispatch function is we're going to use it later on when we create the add items, remove items, increase items, and decrease items, and so on. And it's going to be used to basically run that action through our cart reducer that we just created. So that's what the dispatch function is for. So now what we're going to do next is we're going to create a context values like we did previously. And then what we're going to do is we're going to basically spread the state out. So essentially we're spreading out these items here, so cart items, item count, and total count, into the context values. And then now we're going to return a context provider. So we're going to say return cart context dot provider, and it's going to take a value prop, and we're going to set that to our context values. We're going to close that out, and in between that we're also going to return the children that we get passed in as props. And then finally we're going to export cart context. So export default cart context. Provider. Now what we need to do is the same thing we did previously when you created the product context. We need to go into the app.js file, and then we need to import that context. So similar to what we're doing already, app.js file rather, is actually the index.js file. So what we're doing with the product context provider. So we're going to do the same thing here. So we're going to import that context first. So it's inside context, and it's the cart context that we want. And then we're going to wrap the app. So we're just going to put it beneath the product context. We're going to move that inside here. Save that out. And then now if you go to our app and we refresh everything, so it means everything is working. So obviously we're getting a warning here saying that we haven't used the dispatch function just yet. We're going to be using that in just a moment when you create the functions to update the cart items. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to wire up the cart item or the cart icon here to use the item count from our cart context. So we're going to go into the components, and then we're going to open up cart icon.jsx. And now we're going to make use of the cart icon. So at the moment it's set to 0, but that's fine, because obviously we're going to be updating that later on. So let's first import the cart context. So we're in the component, so we're going to come out of the cart icon folder, and we're going to come out of the components, and then we want the context, and then we want the cart context. And then we're also going to need the use context function from React. So we're going to say use context. Now inside the cart icon here, we're going to pull out the item count. So remember that was returned from the initial state, and it was set to 0. So item count, and then we're going to say use context, and we're going to pass in the cart context. So now we have the item count. What we want to do now is we want to do a check. So we want to check to see if the item is greater than 0. So if it's greater than 0, then obviously we want to use that item count and display it. If it's not, then we don't want to display the span here. So let's do that in code. So we're going to now do a check. I'm going to say item count greater than 0. If it is, then we want to return the span, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to cut this, and we're going to return this span here, and we're going to put that item count inside the span. So if it's greater than 0, whatever it is, we're going to return the span, and we're going to return the item count. Otherwise, we're just going to return null, because obviously the user hasn't added anything to their cart just yet. So we're going to save that out, and then if we go to our React app here, so we're getting item count of object is undefined. So we're getting an error on line number 7. So let's have a look here. So we're passing cart context. So let's double check what we're doing here. So we've got cart context, and we're exporting out. So export const cart context and bringing that out, but the way we're using it is not correct. So let's go back into our file, and because obviously we've just exported it out, we need to wrap that in curly braces. So if you save that out, and now that should be working just fine. So there we have now. So the number 5, the hard code, the value that we had previously has now gone, because obviously the item count is 0. So what's happening is that once that is 0, then it's just going to return null. If it's greater than 1, then it's going to return the item count. So we've got that working now. And what we're going to do next is we're going to start adding things to the cart, and we're going to have the add item. We're going to get that to work now. So now we're going to create the first function to add an item to the cart context. In fact, we're going to create an action creator. So for this, we need to go back into the cart context.jsx file, which I have open already. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a function. So we're going to call this add product. And the function is going to take a product as a parameter. And what we're going to do is we're going to make use of the dispatch function here. So we're going to call that. And inside it, what we're going to do is we're going to pass a object. So we're going to pass an object, and it's going to have type. And we're going to set that to add item. So it's very similar to Redux. If you've done Redux before, this is the same concept here. So we're going to set the type property, and we're also going to have a payload. And we're going to set the payload to be the product that gets passed in here. So that's our action creator. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass that down via the context. So we're going to pass it down here. So I'm just going to create a little bit of space, and then we're going to pass that down. So that means any component that reaches into the cart context is going to be able to also get the add product. So you can imagine we're going to use this in the shop component, and we can also use it in the single product component as well. So that's what we're going to be doing later on. So now that we've added the action creator, we need to update the reducer now to make sure it's listening for this action type here. So we're going to go into our cart reducer, and we're going to update this. So the first one is going to be a case where if it's add item, we want to add the item to the cart items in the state. So let's have a crack at that. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a switch. So we need to create a case rather. So we're going to say if it's going to be if action type is add item, okay, then we're going to basically update the state, because this is something that we're concerned with here. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to check to see if the item is not in the cart already, because if the item is in the cart, we don't want to add another duplicate item on there. So that's what we're going to do. So we're just going to write a comment here to help us. We're going to say check if item is in cart. So that's what we're doing here. So we're going to do an if statement, and we're going to say if the item, so it's going to be in the current state, and it's going to be in state.cart items, and then we need to find that item. So we're going to do a find on it. So cart items is an array, if you remember, and then we're going to try and find the item. So we're going to say item, And then we're going to check now. We're going to get the item.id. So this is going to be the current items. So it's going to loop over the current items and get the current item ID. If that is equal to action.payload.id, and this is the payload that gets passed in from the action creator. So when we pass that in here, that's going to be an object and it's going to have an ID property on it. Now, if that is going to be equal to the item.id and it's not currently in there. So when this runs, it's going to check to see if the item is there. And if it returns a undefined or a false value, that's what we're trying to find out here. Then that means the item is not in the current cart items. So it means that we need to now add that item in the payload to cart items. So to do that, we're going to mutate the current state. So we're going to say state.cartItems. And then we're going to now push that in here. So we say push. We're going to use the push function because cart items is an array. And we're going to push an object. And then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to spread out the action.payload because this is a new object or a new product that we have, and payload is an object. So we spread out the contents of payload into this new object that we're going to be adding to the cart items. And we're also going to now attach another property, and we're going to add that to be quantity. And we're going to set that to 1 because this is the first time it runs. We're setting it to 1 because the current product does not have a quantity property, and we want to have a quantity property that the user can have multiple pairs of something or multiple items of the same thing. So it can have a bag, and maybe they want 2 or 3 different items or three times that same bag. So that's what that quantity is for. So we're going to push that into the cart items. Now, outside of this if check here, we're going to return the state here. So this if check is only going to run if the item is not currently in the cart items. And if it's not in there, then we push in that new item. So we're going to now return some new state. Now, as for the new state, we're going to return the old state, and we're going to spread that out because there could be contents in there that we haven't touched. So we don't really want to sort of make a change to that or delete anything from the state. So we're going to spread the current state, and we're going to update the items that we have already updated. So it's going to be the cart items, and we're going to set that to a new array, and we're going to spread out the contents of the current state.cart items that we've mutated here. We've added something to already if it's not there already. And then what we want to do now is we want to update the item count and the total. Now for that, we're going to need a helper function. So I'm just going to come up here and I'm going to create a new function, and I'm going to call this sum items. Now this function is going to take the cart items as a parameter, and then it's going to add up the items for the quantity and add up the items for the total. So let's actually implement it. So we're going to say const sum items, and then we're going to now take the cart items as a parameter, and then what we're going to do inside here is we're going to first return an object. We're going to return an object, and that object is going to have the item count, just need to have the arrow function, so it's going to be cart items. So we don't have the correct, there we are, syntax there. So we have the item count, and then the item count now is going to be the total of all of the quantities. So the quantity of each and every product that we have in the cart items. So for this, we can use the reduce function because cart items is an array. And what we want to do is we want to basically iterate over each of the items inside that array, which is going to be objects, and we want to basically get the quantity property of those objects, and we want to add them together. So this looks like a really good use case for the reduce function, and let's actually implement that now. So we're going to say cart items, and then we're going to call the reduce, and the reduce takes a callback function and an accumulator. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pass that in first. So this is going to be the accumulator as the second argument, and the first argument is the callback function. So the first argument to this callback function is the accumulator, which we've set to 0, and we'll call that total. And then we're going to have the product. So we'll just call that product. So the actual object, which is going to be that product that was passed in. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to basically add the total and product.quantity together. And we're going to keep doing that for all of the items in the cart items like that. So what's happening here is that we have the cart items and we basically iterate over that. We get each item as prod and we get the accumulator. We set that to 0 and then we basically add 0 for the first instance. We add it to prod.quantity and we add it for that first item, and then for the second item we do the same thing, third item we do the same thing, and we keep doing that until there are no more items, and then we simply return the total into item count, and that's the number of items that are in the cart itself. And then we're going to do something similar for the total. So we're going to get the cart items again, and then we're going to call the reduce function, and then this time we're going to have the callback function and the accumulator, and then we're going to have the total, and we're going to have prod, but it's going to be slightly different because this time what we want to have is the total, and we're going to add the product.price multiplied by the product.quantity. So let's do that in code. So total plus, and let's just wrap that in brackets, and then we're going to have prod.price, and then we're going to multiply that with prod.quantity. So what this is doing is that it's going to get the item, and then it's going to multiply the item's price with the quantity. So if the quantity happens to be 2, for example, and the price is 10, then it's going to multiply 2 by 10, and it's going to add that to the total, and initially it's 0, and it does that for each and every item that we have in our cart. So now that we have this helper function here, and what we can do is we can also export that so that we can sort of use this function anywhere that we need in our app. So just export that there, and then we're going to come back down here to the state that we're returning here. So what we want to do is we want to basically spread out the result of this function here. Now the function here returns an object, and it means that we can use the spread operator. So what we're going to do is we're going to say 3 dots and then some items, and we're going to pass it state.cartItems, and then that basically does the calculation in there, and it returns that object, and we spread out the contents of that object into this state here, and we save this out. So now if we go back here and just make sure that we haven't got any errors in our function or in our reducer, so this means that it seems to be working correctly. Obviously we're going to test it later on when we wire up the add item or add product function for the add to cart buttons, and next that's what we're going to be doing. Now, before we use the add product function, we're going to create a helper function that we're going to use to help us decide if we need to display add more or add to cart on the buttons. So now we have the add to cart here. When that button is clicked, we want to show add more because we already have that item in the cart, and we then want to increase the quantity of that item. And for that, we're going to need a helper function, and that's what we're going to create now. So if you go back to our code editor here, and inside of the components folder, or inside of the source folder rather, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this helpers.js. Now in this file is going to contain all of the functions that we're going to need, or all the functions that are going to help us to do certain things, like this function here. So we're going to first export the function. So we're going to say export const, and we're going to call it is in cart. Now this function is going to take the product, and it's also going to take the cart items, because what we want to do is we want to find that item in the cart items. So if that product is already been added to the cart items, then we want to either return true or return false for that. So we're just going to simply use the find method on the cart items array. So let's do it now. So we're going to first take the product as the first argument, and we're also going to take the cart items. Now as for the function, it's going to be really simple. We're just going to return the result of cart items dot find. So cart items dot find, and we're going to have the item, and we're simply going to do a check. So we're going to say item dot id is equal to product.id. So this is going to iterate over all of the items in cart items, and it's going to check the ID of each product in the cart items. If that happens to equal one of the ID that is passed in for product, then that means that item is in the cart, and then it's going to return that item, and it's going to be a truthy value. If it's not in there, then it's going to return undefined, and that's going to be a falsy value. And then we're going to make use of that later on in terms of deciding what to basically display on the button, to either display add to cart or add more. So we'll save this out for now, and then we'll use it in the next video. So now that we have the isInCart function, the next thing is to now wire up the add product function that we created in the context. But before doing that, I've just realized that the way we're exporting the context is slightly wrong. So what we have here is a nested object. So we have another object inside, and then for the property, we're setting it as context values. And later on, when we destructure the items from the context, it's just going to make it a little bit tedious. So we're going to remove this extra object like this. So if you had that on there previously, just remove it, because context values is itself an object. And then later on, we can just pull off the state, the cart items, and any of the functions that we're using. So just make sure you have it like this. Now we're going to wire up the add product function that we've created. And for that, we're going to start with the featured product collection, or the featured product component. So if you open up the components, and under the shared folder here, we're going to now wire up the add product component. So there's a few things that we need. We need the isInCart function, and we need to obviously reach into the cart context. So let's pull in the isInCart function first. And it's going to be in the helpers file. Now, what we also need to do is we need to reach into the context, and then we need to pull off the cart items and the add product. But before doing that, we also need the use context. So we're going to pull that off React. And then now we're going to now pull off the item. So we're going to get the add product function, and we're also going to get the cart items. And this is going to come from use context. And it means we also need the context itself. So we're going to import that in. And that's going to be out of this one, and then into context and the cart context like this. And we're going to pass that in like so. Okay, so at this point we have the context. So we have the add product and we have the cart items that we've pulled off. And then the next thing we need to do is, because we're going to be calling the isInCart function, we need to create a product. Now, the way we have the props in this component is that we're also having injected the history object from the React router module, and then we're only simply getting a single props object that we can then destructure the items that we need. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a const product, and this is going to be a function. So it's basically going to just mirror what we have, but it's going to be a separate product variable. So image URL, price, and ID. And we also need the description. So we're going to pull that off the props first, and then we're going to add that to our product variable. Now we need this product because we're going to call the isInCart function later on. So the next step now is inside the JSX, what we need to do is we need to do a conditional logic test. So if the item is in the cart already, we want to display add more. If the item is not in the cart, then we just simply want to have add to cart as we have here at the moment. So I'm going to go in here, and then I'm going to use the curly braces, and then we're going to cut this button first, and we're going to put it in here. And then we're going to do our conditional check inside here. So we're going to call the isInCart function. And if you remember, it takes the product and it also takes the cart items. So we get the cart items from here, and we have our product variable just there. So if the item is not in cart items already, if it's not in there, then what we're going to do is we're going to display this button, and we want to have the add to cart button like this. So that's all we're doing. Now, along with this, so I'm just going to format this slightly. So I'm just going to put that down there like that. And then the button here is also going to have an on-click handler. So let's add that in now. So when this button is clicked, we want to now wire up the add product function that we have from the context. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the callback function, and then we're simply now going to say the add product, and then we're going to pass the product that we created there. So it's going to pass the product. And if you remember, the way that this component is constructed is that it's going to have the product details passed in as props, and which we're destructuring here. And then we have the product, and we're simply passing that to the add product function that we're getting from the use context. So that's what's happening here. So now, in the grand scheme of things, it's going to check to see if it's in cart, if the item is in cart already. If it's not in the cart, then it's going to display this button, and it's going to then have the on-click handler to add the item to the product. Otherwise, we want to display another button. So we're going to call is in cart again. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to put that here. But this time I'm not going to put the not in there. So I'm not going to invert it, because now I want to confirm that the item is in the cart, and then I want to basically display another button. So for that, I'm also going to copy this, and I'm going to put it on a separate line. Now, if the item is in the cart already, then I want to display add more, and put it in like that. And then we're also not going to call the add product, because the item has been added already. Later on, we're going to create another function to increase the item quantity. And for that, we're going to have a separate function. So this is simply just going to have an empty function for now. And then later on, we're going to come back and update it with a function to increase the quantity of that particular product. So I'm going to save this out here. And then what I'd also like to do is the add more is going to have a different button style. So it's going to have an ID, and that's going to be set to button white, and it's going to be an outline like this. Now this basically wires up our add to cart button here. So let's just go over what's happening again. We're importing the, so I just realized we're not calling this function correctly. So we have is in cart, we have it twice, we only need it once. So we have the is in cart function that we created earlier on, the helper function, and it takes the product and the cart items, and it returns whether the item is in the cart. If the item is not in the cart, then we display this button, and we have the add to cart, and the on-click handler for that is going to be add product. And when the user clicks that button, it's going to add that item to the cart. And then you also have the second button, and this button is only displayed if the item is already in the cart. Then it's going to display add more, and then later on we're going to have a function to basically increase the quantity of that item in the cart. So I'm just going to save this for now, and then in the next video we're going to test out that this actually works. Okay, so now we've wired up the add product function. So what we'd like to do next is we want to test that we can actually add a product to the cart items. So before doing that, let's just go to the React app here and just refresh everything and make sure we're not getting any errors. And then we need to navigate to the shop page, because this is the featured component that we've just wired up to use the add product function. Now, what I like to do is, if you go back into the code editor here, and we're going to go and find the cart icon.jsx, and inside here, we're going to basically pull off the cart items and then log that to the console. So cart items, and then we're going to log this to the console. So cart items. So if you go back now, so this is this component that we've just updated. So that's what we're logging out here. So the cart items at the moment is an empty array, which is the initial state. So that's good. So now if we go back to the featured component here, or the featured product component, what we're doing is when we click on the add to cart button here, we want to basically add that item to the cart. And we also want to make sure that it's going to change to add more once we click on that button once. So that's the outcome that we want. So if we now go back to the page here, and let's say we want to add the studio bag. So when I click on this here, Now, that means that everything is working. So it's changed the button to add more. Look at that. It's working. It's great. And it's also updating the item count in the cart icon in the header there at the moment. And if we now look in the console, what we can see is that we have the cart item added to the, or you have the item added to the cart, and we can have the description, you have the ID, the image URL, the price, the quantity, and the title of that product. So everything seems to be working just fine. At the moment, we do have the add more, but we need to have the button to have a white background. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to go back in here, and because we copied the button, we don't want it's black. What we want now is white, because we want it to have a white background. Now it's going to refresh everything, or it refreshed it immediately, but because obviously we have this state, it's refreshed everything and it's initialized it back to the empty array. But if I click on add to cart now, it changes the style of the button, and it also has the add more on there as well. So everything is working exactly as we want, and that's fantastic, because now it's all wired up. Now we no longer have the number 5 that was hard coded in before, and it's getting this from the point that we add an item to the cart. So if I click on add to cart here again, that updates successfully, and now I have 2 items in my cart. So what I'd like to do now is, obviously there's quite a lot of things that are going on in the background, and I'd like to show you a diagram just to understand exactly what's happening. Right, so as you know, we have the cart context, and we've wired that up to wrap our app component. And the way in which obviously React context works is that any nested component in the app tree can reach into the cart and basically pull items from it. And in this case, we're pulling the cart items, and we're also pulling the add product items as well. So what's happening here is that the moment we click on the add to cart button, it adds the item to the cart, and then what happens is it updates the cart context. So the cart reducer function is going to, or cart reducer is going to run, and then it updates our state. So once the state gets updated, then we have a new item in the cart that gets injected into the cart context, and then that then updates the whole process. And it means that any nested component that's subscribed to the cart context, or is reaching out to the cart context and has an item from it, will get the updated state. So as far as the cart context is concerned, whenever there's an update on it, it pushes everything out, and then the cart icon or any other item that happens to be having state from the context is then updated immediately. So now in the cart icon here, so if you go inside here now, what's happening is that the moment we update the cart items, this gets then re-rendered, and it gets a new update of the cart items, and that's why we see the number of items updating here. So that's just to show you, just a quick diagram to show you the flow of the data in our app right now. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to add more features, and we're going to add the ability to add more items. Now, if I click on this button here, nothing actually happens. And if you remember, we left that blank. And what we're going to do next is we're going to add an increase functionality, where once that is clicked, it increases the quantity of that product. Now, the next place that we need to add the add product to is the single product view. So in this moment here, if we go to the home page, what we're able to do is we're able to apply the add product from this page as well, because this is using the featured product component. So I can actually add these products. However, if I go to the individual product here, you can see that it's clearly not working, because we still have the add to cart and we don't have the add more, because we haven't wired up the add to cart or the add product function to the single product page. So let's do that now. So if you go to the single product file here, so it's going to be under the single product folder. And what we're going to do is we're pretty much going to do what we did with the featured product component. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to have the use context, which we have because we have the product context already, so we can use that again. But what we also need is the cart context. So I'm going to pull that in now. Going to be context. So we have the cart context, and we also need that is in cart function as well. It's going to be in helpers. And then we do pretty much the same thing. However, this time we have a product product variable already. So we don't need to do how we constructed a product in the featured product component. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come down to the JSX and we're going to basically create our logic here. So at the moment we have two buttons. So if you go to the React app here, we have the add to cart button and we have the proceed to checkout button. What we're going to do is we're going to create a third button which is going to hold the add more. So let's create the add to cart functionality first. So it's going to do the same thing as we had previously. So we're going to call the is in cart function and we're going to pass the product, and we also need to pull off the add product and we need to pull off the cart items from the context. So add product and cart items, and this is going to come from the, so we're going to call it use context again, and this time we're going to pass the cart context, and then what we're going to do now is we're going to pass the cart items to the is in cart. So this product here is coming from our state. So this component is slightly different to the featured product component. So it's basically this variable here. So we're setting the product when the component mounts, and that's what we're going to be passing to is in cart, and then we're getting the cart items from the cart context there. Okay, so we do the same thing. So now when we call that, we want to find out that the cart is not in there already. So we need to invert this. So we're going to use the not, and then we're going to get our button, the add to cart button, and that's what we're going to display if the item is not in the cart already. So I'm just going to format this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add the on-click handler for this. So we're going to say when that is clicked, we want to call the add product function. And we're going to pass in the product as the parameter. Now, the next thing that we want to do is if the item is in the cart already. So we're going to say is in cart. And then we're basically going to do the same thing that we've done here. So I can just copy all of that, put that in here, but we're not going to invert it. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to make a copy of this and we can reuse that here. So we're going to say if the item is in there already, then we want add more, but like before, we don't have the increase function just yet. So we're just going to leave that as a blank function. And we have the add more text there already. Okay, so I'm just going to indent that a little bit. Have it like that. So we've got the add product and we've got the cart items from the cart context, and we have the is in cart function. So I'm just going to now save all of that and then just make sure we have the correct function. So we've got the add product for the add to cart and we have add more for increasing the quantity. So for now we go to our React app, and so now we have the add to cart. So if I click on this now, it says add more and it's updating the cart items. So we've now wired up the single product as well. But if we click on add more, obviously that doesn't work, which we're going to do in just a moment. But what I've noticed is that we're calling is in cart twice here, and we're doing the same thing in the featured product component. But what we can do is we can call that just the once and then basically use that as a variable. So because we're doing two function calls here, it's not really efficient. So we can sort of improve that. So we're going to say const item in cart. And what we're going to do is we're going to store the call to this function here. And I'm just going to put that in here like that. And then now instead of using is in cart or calling that twice, we can just call it once like this. And then we're reusing that variable just the once. So there's only a one-time call to is in cart instead of two. So let's refresh that now. Item in cart is not a function. So on line number 39, 40. Okay, so item in cart is not a function. Okay, so what do we call our variable? Const item in cart. And we have our function there. Right, so the issue is that obviously we're trying to call item in cart and it's not a function because it's just going to store whether the item is in the cart. So we don't actually need to make a function call here at all. So all we need to do is just do that. because that contains the return value of is in cart. So if we now save that and then come back here, and then when we add this to the cart, it says add more, and then that's working just fine. So when we come back here now, it means that we're only calling the is in cart just the one time here. We're storing its value in item in cart variable, and then we're using that variable twice here. So it just means that we only call is in cart just the one time, and we don't call it twice. So that's the featured product and the single product wired up with the add product component. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to add the ability to increase that quantity. So now we're going to add the increase function to our cart. So if you go back into the code and we find the cart context, and now we're going to add the increase function. So like the add product, it's going to take the product as a parameter, and we're going to call dispatch again, and we're going to now return type increase, and the payload is going to be the product. So we now have the increase function, and we're going to then add that to the context value. So we're going to simply say increase like this, and then this makes sure that it gets added to the value in the context. So now what we need to do is we need to go into the cart reducer, and we're going to now add that to the cart reducer. So we're going to need to make sure that we're listening for the add item type now. So we're going to go in here and we're going to add a new case. So after the case for adding an item, we're going to add case, and we're going to say when it's increase, then we want to now increase the quantity of the item that's already in the cart. And for this, we need to get the item. So what we're going to do is we're going to have an index. So let's have it as increase index. So we get the index of the item, and then we say state.cart items, and then we're going to find that index. So we can use the find index function, and then we get the item. And then what we want to do now is we want to return the item with the index that matches the item of the payload.id. So what this is doing is that it's going to loop over the items in the cart item, and it's going to return the item whose index matches the payload.id. So whenever there's a match there, we get that index, and then it gets returned into the increase index variable. Now the next thing we need to do now is we want to increase the quantity of that item in the state. So we're going to say cart items, and we're going to now use the increase index, because if you remember, the cart items is an array, and we have that index, and we can reference that particular item using its index in the array. And then we simply want the quantity property on there, because now the item in that array is an object, and it's sitting at that index that we just found. And we get the quantity property, and what we do is we simply increment that, because that quantity is a number that we basically created earlier on when we added the item. So we simply increase that, and now what we need to do is we need to return new state. So we're going to say return, we're going to return a new object, and inside here we're basically going to do similar to what we did previously. So we're going to spread out the previous state, so in items that we didn't touch, and then we're going to update the cart items array, and then we're going to spread out the current array of the state.cart items, because we've incremented the quantity property on there. So state.cart items with an S, and then we simply call this sum items again, and then we pass in the state.cart items to get the item count. So spread that out as well. So I'll just spread that out, and then pass in state.cart items as the parameter for that, and then we get the item count and the total returned from there, and we're spreading that out here into the new state. So we save this out. Now that's saved for us. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to wire up the increase functionality. So we need to go back into the featured product. So that would be under shared, and then feature product here. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to pull off the increase function, because we've added that to our context. And then where we had the blank function, now we can use the increase. We're going to increase that. And then we're simply going to pass the product. So just like we pass product to add product, we're going to pass this product that we're going to be increasing. Now we're going to save this out. And then what we can do is we can go into our React app here. And then we make sure that we are, so this is the single product view, which we haven't wired up just yet. So we'll go to the shop page here. And then we add the item, which we had working previously. Now, if I click on add more, then that increases the quantity of that particular item. And I still have the only single item in there. Now, if we expand this here and we look at the quantity, it tells me that I have I have the same single item, but I have a quantity of 4 now. So that's working perfectly now. Now, just before we wire up the single product page as well, what I like to do is what we did in that page, because here we're calling it isn't cart here twice. So I want to call it once. So I want to make that more efficient. So we're going to have const item in cart. And then we're going to call the isn't cart there just that one time. And then we're going to use that variable there. We don't need to call it because we have that value stored there already. So we're just going to check it. And then we're going to also use that here. Save this out. Now, when we add the item to the cart, still working fine. And we can add more. And that's updating our cart just fine. Fantastic. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to also update the single product view. So go to the single product here. And again, we have the add more, and that was blank. So we need to do the same thing, is that we need to pull off the increase from the context. So we have the add product and the cart items. So we're now going to also get the increase function. And then we're going to now wire up the add more. So we're going to say increase. And like the add product, we're going to also pass the product as the parameter. Save this out. And then now if you go to single product view, and then we have it here. So we've already added items to the cart. So if you now, let's just refresh the page. Just make sure we start from scratch. So everything is empty now. Now, if we add item to the cart, it says add more, and then we can click on that again. It adds it again, 3rd time, 4th time, and 5th time, and double check again here. And then we should have the quantity of 5, and we only have that single item. So we've now wired up the increase. Next, what we're going to do is we need to have a way of viewing the items that we have in our cart. So what we're going to do is we're going to build the cart page. So we're now going to create the cart page, but before we do that, we need to have some SVG files that we're going to use as icons on the cart page. So if you go back into the code editor here, and if we add a new folder, I'm going to call this icons, and it's going to contain our icons, the trash icon, a minus, and a plus icon. Now inside the folder, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it index.js, JSX rather, because we're going to have components inside here. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create 3 separate components, and we're going to export them out. So let's create the first component. So the component is going to be a container for an SVG. So I'm going to do export const, and then we're going to call this one the minus circle icon. And we're going to take the width as a prop because we want to set that dynamically. And then now we're going to have the SVG. So I already have this done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically copy this file that I already have, and I'm going to put it in here. So it's an SVG file here. So we have the SVG attributes. So we've got the width, which we're getting from the props, and then we have the fill, and then the view box, and the path for the icon there. So this is just a simple SVG file, and we're going to do the same thing under the minus icon. So under here, we're going to export another one. And this time, what we're going to do is we're going to export out the plus circle because we need to have a icon for increasing the item quantity. So if we're going to say export const, and then we're going to have plus circle. And then we're going to do the same thing. What we're going to do is we're going to destructure the width property or the width prop. And then again, we're going to have the SVG like this. So this is all going to be provided in the resources. So now we're going to put that in here. And then finally, we're going to have the trash icon. So we're going to have export const and then trash icon. And once again, we're going to destructure the width. And then we're going to return that SVG. So now we have 3 different icons and they're all SVG, and we're going to dynamically set the width for that. So just make sure you have that saved, and we're going to use this in the cart page. We now have the icons to show a minus, a plus, and a trash icon. Now the next thing is we're going to build the cart page. So inside the pages folder here, we're going to create another folder and we're going to call it cart page. And inside here, we're going to have a few files. So the first file that we're going to have is going to be the cart page.jsx. So cart page.jsx. And then we're going to have the style sheet. And we're also going to have 2 other files. So we're going to have a cart items.jsx. And this is going to be the component that's going to display each item or each product that we have in our cart. And then we're going to have a total component that's going to display the total and a button to check out. So we're going to start with the cart items first, because this is the component that's going to do most of the heavy lifting. And what we're going to do is we're going to do the usual and import React first. And then we're going to now use the icons that we created. So we're going to import all 3. So we had the plus circle icon, and we had the minus circle icon and the trash icon. So the 3 icons that we created with the SVGs, and then that's going to come from out of this folder, out of the pages folder, and then it's going to go into icon, and then it should be in that index file there. Now we're going to build the component. So we're going to have const cart item, and then it's going to take a product as a prop, and then we're going to return some JSX. So just before returning the JSX, we're going to destructure some properties from the product. So we need the title of the product, we need the image URL, we need the price, the quantity, and later on we're going to be pulling off some functions to increase, decrease, or delete a product from the cart. Now that's going to come from the product. And then now we're ready to return some JSX. So we're going to return quite a few JSX. So we're going to now create the wrapper for the cart items. And then we're now going to create a div to display the image. So we're going to use the image element. And we're going to set the source to be the image URL. And we're going to give it an alt tag. And we're simply going to say that this is a product. And close off the image tag. And then under the images, what we're going to do is we're going to have the name and the price of the cart item. So for this, it's going to have its own div, and we're going to give it a class name of name price. Name hyphen price. And then inside here, we're going to simply have a h4, and then we're also going to have a p tag. And inside the h4, we're going to have the title of the product, and then inside of the p tag we're going to have the price. So what we want to do here is we want to just basically stick a $sign just before the price so that it shows it in dollars. Now the next thing we want to have is the quantity, so how many of the product the user has in there. So we're going to create a div for that. And then we're going to set its class name to be the quantity. And then as for the quantity, we're going to have another p tag. And then we're going to use template strings here. So we're going to write quantity, colon, and then we're going to use the variable, so $, and then quantity. So we're just going to indent this. Now, once we've done the quantity, we're ready to now create the buttons to increase, decrease, or remove the product. So we're going to have a buttons container for this. And then we're going to give it a class name. And it's going to be buttons container. And then inside here, we're going to have the buttons to increase, decrease, and remove the product. So the first button that we're going to have in here is going to be the button to increase the quantity of that item. So we're going to first create a button element. And inside of this element, we're going to use the plus circle. If you remember, it takes a width property. I'm going to set that to be 20 pixels. So we have the button to increase a quantity for a product. Now the two other buttons, we're going to show them depending on the quantity. So we're going to show them depending on the quantity. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some tests here. So we're going to say if the quantity is equal to 1, that means they only have one item of this particular product in the cart, then we want to show this button here. And this button is the button to remove that product. Obviously, because they have just that one in there, then they might want to remove it. So we want to give them the option to remove that item. So then we're going to return a button. And then inside of this button, we're going to have the trash icon. So we're going to use that component, trash icon. And then again, we're going to set the width to be 20 pixels. So this is going to test to see if the quantity is 1, then we're going to show that button. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do another test here, and we want to show the increase. So the quantity needs to be at least 1 to be able to see that button there. So what we're going to do is we're going to say quantity is greater than 1. Then we want to show this one here. So inside here, we're going to use the minus. So we're going to use a minus circle, and then we're going to give it a width, and we're going to set that to be 20 pixels as well. So save that out. So now we have the cart item here. So we're using the 3 icons. So the plus circle, the trash icon, and the minus circle. We're only going to show the trash icon if the quantity is 1. Then that means we're going to give the user the option to delete the item from the cart. Or if the item is greater than 1, then we're going to show the minus circle, because that means that they might want to decrease the quantity of that item in there. So when you save that out here, now what we're going to do is in the next video, we're going to build the style sheet. So just before doing that, let's actually export out our component. And now we have the cart item, or it should be cart item. So it should be cart item without the S. Now, next video, what we're going to do is we're going to build the style sheet for this cart item. So just before adding the styles, what we're going to do is we're going to apply a few class names. So we're going to apply a class name that we didn't apply earlier on, which is going to be the cart item. And then we also want to apply a class name to the image container. And we're going to call this item image. And then for the buttons, we're also going to apply a class to each of the buttons. So for the increase, we're going to just come down here, and then we're going to apply a class name here. We're going to call it button increase. And then for the trash, I'm going to come down again, and then we're going to call this one button trash. And then finally, we have the class name for the minus, and that's going to be button decrease. So just make sure we have these styles in here, or these class names, so we can style them. And then now we can go into the cart page.styles.sass file, and we're going to apply some styles. So we're first going to start with the cart item, and we're going to center align the text. So text align, and then we're going to give it a border. We're going to set this to be 1 pixel solid, and it's going to be a shade of gray, and we're going to have a margin, and we're going to set that to 2 rem, just give it some nice breathing space. And we're also going to set a padding, and we'll set that to 1 rem all round. Now that does the cart page or cart item. Now we want to target the item image container, And then inside there, we're going to target the image element, and we're going to give it a width of 50 pixels. So we're going to make it really small because we just want to give the user an idea of what that item is. So we'll just get a small image in there. And then we're going to target the name price container. So we're going to say name price. And then inside here, we're going to target the h4 first. And what we're going to do is we're going to give that a margin. And we're going to set that to 0. And then we're going to have the p tag. And for that, we're going to give it a font size. And we'll set that to be 1 rem. And then we're going to give that a font weight. And we'll just set that to normal. So that's the name and the price. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add some styles for the buttons container. So we need to have dot buttons container. And we're going to have some general styles here. So we're first just going to have button. And these styles we can't get from Bulma, so we're just going to give it in here. So we're going to say border, none. And just customize that a bit further. Padding, I'm going to give that 0.5 rem and 1 rem. And then we're going to have a cursor. We're going to set that to be a pointer. And then we're going to give it a font size. And we'll set that to a small figure, say 10 pixels. And we'll give it a margin right. And let's just set that to 5 pixels for now. So we can tweak these values just to see how they look. And then we're going to target the individual buttons. So we're going to start with the button increase. So we're going to say button increase. And for this one, we're going to give it a color, and we're going to set that to be white. And we're also going to give it a background color. And we're going to set that to a shade of black. So we're going to say 1A, 1A, 1A. So just a nice shade of black. And then after the button increase, what we're going to do is we're going to target the button decrease and button trash. And we can do that in one go, I think. So we're going to do button decrease and the button trash. And for this, we're going to give both of them a color of white. And we're going to give it a background color. And we're going to set this to be #D9534F. So it should be like a sort of a shade of red there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to target the viewport of 1024. So we have the buttons container here, and what we're going to do is we're going to target that. So we're going to say at media. So at media, and then we've been targeting 1024, and we're going to first target the cart item. And we're going to give that a display of flex because we want to show each cart item on a single line. So we're going to say display of flex, and then we're going to give it a space between. So we'll use justify content, and then we're going to use space between. And then we're going to target the div inside of the cart item. And then we're going to give that a margin of 1 rem. And then once we have that, we're going to target the name and the price. Name hyphen price. And then we're going to give that a width of 200 pixels. And that should be the min width. So for the 1024, that should be the styles that we need. So we have a display flex, justify content, space between, and we have a margin and the width for the name price as well. So this sets out the styles for the cart item. Now, obviously we can't really see this until we build the cart page.jsx, and that's what we're going to do next. So in the last couple of videos, we've been building the cart item component. So we built that component and we also added some styles for it. Now to actually see that component, we need to build the cart page, and that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to import React first. And we're also going to import the cart context because we're going to need to pass down all of the items in the cart. So out of this folder and then into the context, and it's the cart context that we want. Now we're also going to need the layout because we want the header and the footer. So we're going to get layout from the layout in the shared, and then layout. And then we also want the cart item that we just built. So it's going to be cart item. It's going to be in this directory, cart item. So we've called it cart items. So let's just rename that to cart item because it's just going to contain a single item. So that updates that. And then we're going to have the style sheet. So we're going to import that in. So cart page.styles.sass. So at the moment, this contains the styles for the cart item, but we're going to also be adding the styles for the cart page as well. So we're going to start things off. So we're going to create the component. So const cart page. And we're going to now basically assemble the items that we're going to pass to the cart item. So we're going to have the cart items. We're going to get that from the context, and we're going to get the item count, and we're going to get the total, and we're also going to be pulling off some other functions that we're going to create in the cart context. At the moment, we have the add product in there, and we're going to be adding decrease and removing and clearing the cart as well. So we're just going to leave that like that for now. And then we're going to say we need the use context. So we're just going to put that in here, and we're going to pass the cart context, and we're going to need to pull off the use context function from React. So we're going to say use context. So that does the items. So cart items, item count, and total. We're going to get that from the context. Now what we're going to do is we're going to return some JSX here. So we're going to first return the layout. And inside the layout, we're going to return the cart items. And we're also going to have a heading for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the fragment first, because we're not going to have a wrapping div. And then we're going to have the h1. And we're going to call this the cart. Now what we're going to do is we're going to check to see the number of items that are in the cart. So if there's nothing in the cart to start off with, we don't really want to display the cart items. So we want to display a message to say that the cart is empty. So we're going to have curly braces, and we're going to check the length of cart items. So we're going to say cart items.length. And if it's 0, then what we're going to do is we're going to display the message that says that the cart is empty. So if it's 0, we're going to have a div, and then we're going to basically say your cart is empty. So your cart is empty, and we're going to give this a class name. Let's say empty cart like that. Otherwise, we're going to want to display the cart items. So for that, we're going to add that in here. So we're going to display the cart items under this. And again, we're going to make use of the fragment. So we're just going to close that off because we don't want to have another div in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to now create the div, and we're going to have another div inside there. So we need the fragment because what we're going to do later on is we're going to have the total component to come under this containing div for the cart items. So that's why we need the fragment there. So we're going to give this a class name, and we're going to set that to be the cart page. And we're also going to give this second div a class name, and we're going to set this to cart item container. So it's going to contain our cart items. Now inside here, we're going to return the cart items. So depending on how many items we have in our cart, we're going to return the cart items. So we're going to map over that. So first we're going to get the cart items, and then we're going to map over it. And for each item, we're going to display cart items, and then we're going to pass the props that it needs. So we're going to use the spread operator in here, and we're basically going to spread out all of the items from the item object. So each item inside the cart items is an object, and because inside the array, so we're going to spread that out in here, and then we're going to give a key, and we're going to set that to be item.id. And finally, we're just going to make sure that we don't have an error. So we've got the map there, and what we need is the, okay, so we need to cut this in here. So we already have that. So cart item, and it needs to be an actual component like this. So it's going to get the item, and it's going to spread that out as a prop, or all the props that are inside the item object here, and then it's going to spread that out and give it to the cart item. And in the cart item here, that's what we're doing at the top. We're destructuring the image with the title, the image URL, the price, and the quantity, and that's going to come from the item. And we need a key, and we're setting that to be the item.id, and that's going to be displaying depending on the number of items that we have in the cart. So that's our cart page, and then we're going to export this out. I'm going to say export default cart page. And now what we need to do is we need to add some styles. So we're going to go into the cart page.styles.sass, and we're going to add a style for the empty cart. So if the cart is empty, we just want to sort of center that, and we're also going to center the title, which is going to be this h1 here. So if you go, just move this file here. So we're going to center this one, and we're also going to center this div here if that is displayed. So we're going to target that now. So we're going to put that just in front. We're going to say we want the h1 and the empty cart. And we're going to use text align. We're going to center that. And then we're also going to make sure that we have the display set to flex. So we're going to come in here, and we're going to say cart page, and we're going to set its display to be flex, and we're going to justify the content, and we'll use a center value for that. So couple of simple styles inside there for the cart page. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to obviously create a root for this cart page, and that's going to be inside of the index.js file, or it's going to be in our app.js rather. So we need to import the cart page. So I'm going to say import cart page from components, and then it's going to be inside pages, and then it's going to be the cart page, and then we want the cart page component like that. And then what we're going to do now is going to create a root for this. So we're going to say root path, it's going to be /cart, and when you go to this root, we're going to display the cart page component. So save this out. So now if you go to our React app, and we basically go to the root that we just created, so it's going to be /cart. So at the moment our cart is empty, and this is exactly what we're getting. So that's basically our check to say that there's nothing in the cart items itself. And we're also getting a warning here, and it doesn't recognize class name, so we seem to have a typo in our file. So let's just go back in here, and let's go back to our cart page first, and we seem to have a class name somewhere. Yep, so it's right here. So let's just correct that, and if we come back, so this now nicely centers your cart is empty text, and we're also not using the item count and the total. So it's saying that the item count and the total is not being used, and we're going to use that for the total component when we build that later on. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to go to the cart icon in here, and when this is clicked, I'd like to be taken to the, so when we click on the cart icon here, I want to be taken to this cart page, and that's what I'm going to do now. So we're going to add a route for this. So all we're going to do now is we're going to have an onClick handler here, and we're going to say when this icon is clicked, we want to go to, so history.push, and we want to go to the /cart route like that. And what we need is the with router, so that we get the history object. So I'm just going to import that in here. So with router, so React router DOM, and then we're going to use that higher order component so that we get the history object injected. And we're going to export that out like that. So that should give us the history object, and we need to pull that off as well. So history, and then once that icon is clicked, it's going to basically take the user to the /cart route. Now we don't have anything in the cart, so we're going to go to the shop page, just add a couple of items, and then we'll go to our cart page, and then now we have our cart item component displaying nicely. So we have the cart, the item image in the cart, and we also have the price and the quantity, and we have the buttons to increase and decrease. So at the moment these buttons aren't working, so we haven't basically created the functionality to increase or remove the item, and also to decrease the item quantity, and which we're going to be doing next. But before we do that, we're going to create the total component. So just under or just next to the items in the cart page, we're going to have a total component that basically shows the total amount the user has to pay, and also is going to give them a button to check out. So now I'm going to peel the final part of the cart page, which is the total component. So if we go back into our code editor here, and then we go to the cart page, and we've already created a file for this. If we go into the total.jsx file, and then we're going to start building the cart page. So we're going to import React, and we're also going to need the router. So we're going to need to be able to route the user to the checkout page. So we're going to import with router. It's going to have with router, and we're going to get that from React router DOM. And obviously the styles are going to come from the cart page.style.sass file, so we don't need to import that. So we're just going to do a const total here, and we're going to pull off a few things. So it's going to display the item count, so that's the first thing that we need, and it's also going to display the total. Later on, we're going to also have a function to be able to clear the cart, but we haven't created that functionality just yet. So we're going to return the JSX, and we're going to have a div, and we're going to give this div a class name. We're going to set that to total container, and then under this one here, we're going to first have the total amount, and we're just going to give that another class name, and we're going to call that simply total. So it's going to contain the total amount in here. Now we're going to have a p tag, and we're going to say total items, and we're going to basically say item count here. So the total items in the cart, and then we're also going to have another p tag, and we want to show the amount that the user has to pay. So for this, we're going to make use of template strings, and we're going to say total amount, or let's just leave it at total, and we're going to have a colon, and then we're going to use the variable. We're going to say total. Just going to indent this so it lines up, and then after this, now after the total container, we're going to have the buttons to be able to check out, or a button to clear the cart. So I'm going to call this here class name. I'm going to give that a class name, and we're going to call it a checkout, and the first button is going to be the checkout button. So I'm going to give it a button, and we're going to give that a text of checkout, and then we're going to give it a class name, get some styling. So we're going to use the button from Bulma, and we're going to make it black, and we're going to have an onClick handler for this as well. So we're going to take the user. So when the user clicks on this button here, we want to be able to take to the checkout page, which we don't have just yet, but we're just going to put that in here now. So history.push. So we should have a checkout page. So history.push, and we're going to go to the checkout page. Now that's the checkout button. We're also going to have another button. So under this one here, we're going to have the button to basically indent this so it can fit it all into the screen like this. So we're going to create another button, and we're going to basically use this button to be able to clear the cart. So we're going to call it clear like that, and we're going to give it some styles. So we're going to say class name, and we want the button from Bulma, and we also want this button to be white without any outline. So we're going to leave it like that. And as for the on-click handler for this, we want to be able to clear the cart, which we haven't implemented just yet, but we're just going to put in a blank function here for now, and then later on we're going to update this. So when the user clicks on the checkout button, it's going to push them to the checkout route, which again we don't have, but we're going to create that later on as well. So this is the total component. So we're going to export default it out. And what I'd like to do now is I want to use this in the cart page. So we're going to go to the cart page, and we're going to import the total. So I'm going to say total from the total component. So it should be in the same one here. So import with a T. And what we're going to do now is, this is why we needed the fragment. So we're going to put it just after the cart page container here. And what we're going to do is going to say total, and it needs a few things. So if you get the total file here, just put it here. So we have the cart page, and for the total, we need to pass the item count and the total, and that's what we're going to be doing here. So we're going to pass that in, say item count, and that's just simply going to be the item count that we have. And we're also going to pass the total, and that's going to be the total that we have. Now, if we save that out and go to the React app here, so we're getting unexpected use of history. So we're going to go back in here. We don't have the with router exported, and we also don't have the history pulled off from the props. So we're going to do that now. So we're going to say with router. We're going to pull that off, and then we're going to get the history object, and we save that out. Now we shouldn't be getting any errors related to that. So now if we add some items to our cart, and then we go here, now we have the total items or the total component displaying, but we don't want it to be displayed at the bottom. We want it to be displayed next to the each item in the cart here. So we're now going to apply some styles. So we're going to go to the cart page under the cart item here. And it seems that we have, just before adding in the styles, actually, we have the app media inside the cart item. And I'm just going to cut that now. And I'm going to place that outside because it needs to be just on that side there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to now apply these styles for the total container. So I'm going to put total container here. And we're going to give it a margin of 2 rem. And we're going to give it a text align. I'm going to center that like that. And in the media query here, what we're also going to do is inside the cart page, we're going to target the total container. And I'm going to now just simply text align the center. So this is just to make sure that on the desktop view that the content inside the total container is center aligned. So that's all the styles that we need for the total container or the total component there. Now, if we come back here and basically just populate our bag with, or our cart with some items here. So we're still getting the style to be not next to it. So let's see why that is. So we should have all the styles in the style sheet. So that should all be there. And let's go back to the cart page here. And yeah, so the issue is to do where we've placed the total. So we need to bring it out here, and it needs to be inside the cart page. So if you save that out now, and that's where it's supposed to be. So now we have the cart items, each cart item. So whatever we have added to the cart is going to be displayed on the left, and on the right here we have the total component, and it's got the checkout and the clear button. So obviously these aren't currently wired up yet. So yeah, we are going to the checkout route, but that's not currently, we don't have a component for that, but the clear is not working. So next what we're going to do is we're going to complete the functionality for the cart. So we're going to add the ability to decrease, the ability to remove an item, and the ability to also increase an item and to clear the cart. So that's what we're going to be building next. So now we're going to add the rest of the cart functionality. So we're going to start with the decrease function. So for this, we need to go back to our cart context. So we're going to go back into the cart context here, and we're now going to add a function for decreasing the amount of a particular product. So we're going to say const decrease, and it's going to take the product as a parameter. And then we're going to call dispatch, and we're going to return a type of decrease, and the payload is going to be product. So like we've been doing already, and then we're going to pass that down in the context. So it takes product, and we're returning a type decrease, and the payload is going to be the product that is passed in when that button is clicked. So now we're going to go into the cart reducer, and we're going to now listen for a decrease action. So when that comes in, then we're going to decrease that particular product. So we're going to now say if the case for decrease, and what we want to do here is we're going to do something very similar to what we did when we increased. So we're going to now get the decrease index. So before we had an increase index, now we're going to have decrease index because we want to get that item from the cart items array. So we're going to use the find index function again. So we're going to have the item, and then we want to return the item ID is equal to action.payload.id. So very similar to what we did previously. And what we're doing just once again is that we're using the find index, and we're going to find the action or the payload that's passed in's ID matches the item ID of the state.cart items. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to get that product. So we're going to say const product, because what we want to do is we want to store that value, because we're going to do a couple of checks in before we actually decrease the amount. So we're going to say const product, and then we're going to get a reference to that item. So it's going to be state.cart items, and then we're going to use the decrease index that we had. So this is going to now contain that product that was passed in from the state.cart items. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to do a simple check here. We only want to decrease if the quantity is greater than 1. Because if the quantity is just 1, then we want to use the ability to remove the item. We don't want to just sort of decrease it to 0 and just sort of kind of maybe create a bug within our app. So we're going to do a check here. So we're going to say if the product.quantity is greater than 1, then we want to decrease that product's quantity. So we're going to say product.quantity, and we're going to simply just use the minus here. We're going to do the reverse of increasing that product. So we're only going to do it if the quantity is greater than 1, and then we're going to decrease that quantity amount. And then what we're going to do, as we've been doing previously, we're going to return new state, and then we're going to spread out the previous state, and then we're going to now change the items. So cart item is going to be a new array, and we're going to spread the new or the state.cart items that we've mutated into that array. And then once again, we're going to call our sum items function, and we're going to pass in state.cart items. So we're just going to spread that out in there like that. And so just go over that quickly again. So we get the product, so we get the decrease index of the product that we want to decrease, and then we make a reference of that product in the product variable, and then we check to see that its quantity is greater than 1. If it is, then we minus that quantity and we decrease it by 1, and then we're returning a new state here. So we save that out, and that does the decrease functionality. So now what we want to do is we want to wire that up in our React app. So that's what we're going to do. So now when we add the item here and we go to the cart page, we need to be able to show the plus, and we need to be able to decrease the amount from the quantity. So we're also going to wire up the ability to increase the quantity amount. So now we're going to go to the cart page, and what we're going to do is we're going to pass down the functions to the cart items. So in the cart items at the moment is only having the product, and we're spreading that out. So what we want to do is if you go into the cart item page here, or cart item component, what we want to do is we want to wire up the plus circle, the trash, and the minus with the functions. So at the moment we have the plus circle, and we also have the minus to decrease the item quantity. So we're going to wire up those functions, and we're going to pass that down as props here. So we're going to go into the cart page, and we're going to get those functions. So we already have the increase, so we're going to pull that off the state, and we have the decrease, and we pull that off the state as well. And now what we're going to do is we're going to pass that down to the cart item. And an easier way to do that would be to just, we're going to create a new variable here. We're going to call it funcs, and we're simply going to just attach the increase and decrease like that, and then we're going to spread this out. So we're going to spread out the funcs so that the cart item here gets these as props, and then we'll go back into the cart item.jsx. And inside here, we're going to pull that off the props. So we're getting the increase, and we're also getting the decrease function. And now we're going to wire this up. So what we're going to do is, in fact, it'd probably be better to just call that props, just to make it a bit more reflective of exactly what it is, because it's the props. And now, because we have obviously a mixture of the product and we have a mixture of the functions as well. So it's not just the product that we're pulling things off. Now we're going to go into the plus circle here, and then we're going to give it a on-click handler. So the button, so we're going to say on-click. When the button is clicked now, we're going to run this callback function, and we're going to call the increase, and we're going to pass in the product. So obviously we're going to now also need to construct a product variable as well. So as we did previously, we're going to have product, and we're going to make that to be the title, the image URL, price, and the quantity. So we're just going to add all of these things, even though it's just the ID that we need, in case that later on we might need to pull off any other data. So we're going to put everything on here. So it's the description, and that's going to be basically an object in its own, and we're going to pass that when the increase is clicked. So let's have a test on that and see if that's working. So description is not defined, so let's go here, and we're going to basically pull that off our state. Now it should be defined. Now we're going to add some products to our cart, and then what we want to do is when we click on the increase, we want that quantity to increase, and obviously the total to now be 71. So it's going to be 2 lots of the cumulus bag and just the single studio bag. So if I now increase this now, so that amount should increase by 15. Our increase function is working just fine. So now what we're going to do is we're going to update the total variable, and we're going to add the total amount into it. To make sure we have the $sign just in front of the total. So this $sign is to interpolate the total variable. So we're going to add another $sign like this, so that we get the actual dollar symbol. And when we save that out, we get the $sign in front of the 86. So we're now going to wire up the decrease button here. So we have the increase working. So we're now going to wire up the decrease button. So if you go back into the cart item here, and if we now go and scroll down to where the decrease or the minus circle is, what we're going to do is we're going to add a on-click handler here. And then all we're going to do is we're going to call the decrease function, and we're going to pass the product like so. So now if we save this out and come back to our cart here, now if we minus the cart here or the item, then that is taken out from the cart. And then again, we can do the same thing here. If we take this off here then it takes that off. So now we have the plus and we also have the minus working for us nicely. We're now going to add the remove function. So when we decrease the amount here and we click on the trash icon, it doesn't actually remove that. So we're going to add that feature to our cart. Now for that, we need to go back into the cart context and we're going to add a remove function here. So we're going to say const remove product. And once again, this is going to take a product and we're going to call the dispatch function. And we're going to pass in a type, and we're going to set this to remove item, and the payload is going to be the product. And then we're going to pass this function down. Now in the cart reducer, we're going to now add a case for removing that item from the cart. So we're going to add a case for it. So we're going to say case, and it's remove item. Now we want to find that item in the cart. So what we're going to do is we're going to filter the current items that we have, and we're going to remove the item that's been passed in. So we're going to filter everything and we're going to leave out the item that's been passed in. So let's do that in code. So we're going to do const new cart items, and then we're going to iterate over the current cart items, and then we're going to use the filter function. So we're going to return all items except the one that's been passed in. So we're going to say item.id, or we're going to say item first, and then we're now going to say item.id, and it doesn't equal the action.payload.id. So all we're doing here is we're filtering the current cart items, and we're going to return all the cart items except the one that has been passed in. So we're going to remove that from the new cart items. And then what we're going to do now is we're simply going to return new state. And then we're going to do as we've been doing before. We're going to spread out the previous state, and we're going to update the cart items, and we're going to spread out the new cart items like that. And then we're going to call our sum items function, and we're going to pass in new cart items. And that's all we need to do to remove a item from our cart. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the total, or go back to the cart item component rather, and we're going to wire up the trash icon. So before we do that, we need to pass down that function. So we're going to get it from the cart context. So we're going to have remove product, and because we're passing it down the funcs, we're going to add that to this object here. So now we have the remove product, and we're going to pass it down to the cart items. So if we go back to the cart item component now, we first need to pull that off the props. So we're going to say remove product, and then we're going to wire up the trash icon here. So we're going to give this an on-click handler. So when it's clicked, we're going to have this callback function be executed, and we're going to call remove product, and we're going to pass in the product that we want to remove. So now we're going to test that this works, and we're going to add some items to our cart. Now when we increase, that's working, decrease, that's working. And now when you click on this one, it removes the item from our cart. If you click again, it removes everything and our cart becomes empty. So now we've implemented the remove product feature. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to add the ability to clear the cart. So if you remember now, if I add an item to my cart here, we had a clear function. So we're going to create the clear function in our cart, and we're going to wire that up. So we're now going to create the clear function in our cart. So for this, we need to go into the cart context here. And what we're going to do is we're going to say const clear cart. And we're not going to take any parameter because all we're going to do is we're going to clear the cart. So we're going to call the dispatch function and we're going to pass in a type and we're going to set that to clear. So that's all we need to do for this function. And then we're going to pass that down in the context. And then in the cart reducer, what we're going to do now is we're going to add a case for listening for that clear. So we're going to say case clear. Now, this is going to be really simple. All we need to do is we need to simply reset everything to what it was. So I'm just going to create that syntax error there. So we're going to return, and then we're just going to reset the cart items to be an empty array. And we're going to reset the item count. So item count, we're going to set that to 0, and we're going to set the total to 0 as well. So we're going to save that out. So now we have the clear. Now inside the cart item page here, so we're going to go to the cart item.jsx component. What we want to do now is we want to, or it's going to be in the total.jsx rather, sorry. So we want to go in here, and what we want to do is we want to wire up the clear. So for this here, we're going to need to pull that off the props. So we're going to say clear cart, and we have to go back up one level. And then we also need to pass that in. So pull that off the state. So we'll say clear cart. And then we're now going to say clear cart. And we're going to pass that function in. So clear cart. So that's coming from the context. And we're simply passing it down to the total because that's where we need it. And then here we're pulling that off the props. And once that button is clicked, we're going to call the clear cart function, and that's going to initiate the clear action creator. So if we now come back to our app here, and then we add some items to our cart, and then we click on the clear cart here, this clears the cart and it resets everything to the initial state. So this completes our cart functionality, but you would have noticed that when we add items to the cart, and then we go to the cart page, and then if you refresh the page, we lose everything. So we want to actually keep the items in some sort of memory. So what we're going to do next is we're going to persist our cart state in the local storage. So I'm now going to persist our cart items in local storage. So I have the cart reducer page open here, or cart reducer file, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a function that's basically going to store our cart items. So I'm going to call this const store cart items, and it's going to take the cart items as a parameter, and we're first going to create a helper variable here. So we're going to have the const cart, and we're going to check to see that the length is greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, then what we do is we return the cart items. If it's not greater than 0, then we're simply going to return an empty array. So we're going to say cart items dot length is greater than 0. If it is, then we're going to return the cart items, and we're going to assign that to the cart variable. If it isn't greater than 0 and it's just sort of an empty array, we're just going to assign an empty array to the cart. So that's all that's doing there. And then we're going to call the local storage function. So this is a window. So this is available on the native window browser. So we're going to say local storage dot set item, and we're going to call it cart. And then what we need to do is we need to stringify this. So we're going to use the JSON.stringify, and we're going to pass in our cart like that. So this function is going to store the cart items in local storage for us. Now, a place where we're constantly updating is when we basically update the item count and the total. And an ideal place to call that would be under the sum, just before the sum items, or inside the sum items, and just before we return the state. So we're going to call the store cart items here, and we're going to pass in the cart items that we get. So this is always going to be the updated version of the cart item. So whenever we add or remove an item, we're always adding the stuff together. We're always adding the item count and the total. So this is an ideal place to call the store cart items function. So now that we have this, just before we go to the cart context file, what we're going to do is we're going to also clear the cart when the user clears it. So when the user clears the cart, we want to remove the local storage item that we've put in there. So we're going to say local storage dot remove item, and we're going to remove the cart that we've put in there previously. So when the user obviously clears that cart, they no longer want it there. So we're going to clear that from the local storage as well. So we're then going to go back into the cart context here. And what we're going to do is in the initial state, we're going to do a few things. So first of all, we need to import the some items. So some items. So we're already exporting that out here at the top. So we have the export const some items, and we import that from the cart reducer. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to check to see if there is an item cart in local storage. So we're going to do a const. So just after creating the cart context here, we're going to have a const cart from storage. And then we're going to do a check here. So we're going to say local storage dot get item, and we're going to get the cart. If it's there, then what we want to do is we want to stringify that. So we're going to say JSON dot, or we want to pass that rather, sorry. So we're going to say JSON dot pass, because we stringified it previously, local storage dot get item, and then we're going to get that cart. And if it's not there, then what we're going to do is we're simply going to return an empty array. So we're going to have an empty array like that. So I'm just going to put this on a new line so that it's easier for us to read. So we're going to say JSON.pass, and then we're going to get the item, and then we're going to pass that and then put that into cart from storage. If it's not there, if we don't have the item in there, we're just simply going to return an empty array. So that would be the case when we start up the app, or when you first visit the page, it's not going to be there. So all we're going to have is an empty array like that. And then we're going to use this in the initial state. So here we have the cart items. So instead of having an empty array here, what we're going to do is we're going to have the cart from storage. So we're going to say cart from storage. And then we're going to call the some items. So instead of setting that to 0, if there's any items that are in the cart already, we want to add them together. And that's why we import the some items already. So we're going to call some items, and then we're going to pass it cart from storage. And then obviously, because this is an object, we want to spread out the result from some items like that. And then this should now basically read the cart from the local storage if it's there. If it's not there, then it's simply going to have an empty array. So let's test this. So now we have 2 items in the cart. So if I refresh here, I no longer lose my item. So I can sort of delete that, add some items. So I'm going to add a few more. And then I now have 4. So if I go to the cart page here, I have 4 items in there. So if I refresh the page, I'm not losing those. So if I clear the page, it's getting cleared. So we're no longer losing the items when the page is refreshed.